If you walked into Moretti territory and didn't know the name, someone would make sure you learned it before you left, assuming you left at all. Dante Moretti built his empire not with luck, but with blood, patience, and a coldness so complete that his own men feared the silence before he spoke more than anything he actually said. He had everything a man like him could want: power, money, respect bought with terror. What he did not have, what he had deliberately cut from his life like a surgeon removing rot, was a family. He made that choice 12 years ago. He made it clean. He never looked back. Until the morning he walked into a bakery on Carver Street and saw two little boys with his eyes. The bakery on Carver Street didn't have a name on the sign anymore. Whatever letters had been bolted above the door had come down. You could see the ghost shapes of them in the paint, darker squares against faded yellow, and nobody had bothered to replace them. The awning was patched in two places with mismatched canvas. One of the front windows had a crack running from corner to corner, held together with a strip of clear tape that had turned amber with age. It was the kind of place that survived on stubbornness and neighborhood loyalty, the kind that smelled like yeast and warm sugar from half a block away and made your chest do something involuntary when you stepped through the door. Dante Moretti had not come here for the bread. He stepped out of the black Escalade at 8:47 in the morning, leaving Caruso behind the wheel and Luca at the curb like always. He didn't need more than that. This block had been Moretti territory for 11 years. The people here knew the routine. Once a month, a quiet visit. An envelope passed across a counter. Sometimes a word or two about nothing important. The weather, the Mets, whether the boiler was still giving trouble. Civil, professional. No raised voices, no broken furniture, no one bleeding on the floor. Dante had always preferred it that way. Clean and understood. He pushed the door open. The little bell above it rang. The bakery was narrow inside, 3 small tables along the left wall, a glass case along the right displaying bread and pastries, a curtained doorway to the kitchen in the back. One overhead light flickered in a way that had probably been flickering for years. The floor was clean swept, but the grout between the tiles was dark with age, and the wallpaper above the chair rail had a pattern of wheat stalks that must have looked cheerful once, maybe in 1987. Behind the counter, an older man named Ferretti was doing something with a tray of rolls. He looked up when Dante entered, and the thing that happened to his face was not a smile. It was the expression of a man who had been waiting and had made his peace with the waiting and was simply confirming that the expected thing had arrived. He set the tray down and reached under the counter. Dante moved toward him. He got 3 steps. That was when he heard it. A voice, small, focused, a child explaining something to another child with the absolute conviction of someone who has worked out an important problem, coming from the corner by the front window. He hadn't looked that direction when he came in. His eyes had gone straight to Ferretti, to the counter, to the routine. Now he turned. And there they were. 2 boys. Maybe 8, maybe 9. Sitting at the table nearest the window, both of them bent over something, their dark heads nearly touching. One of them was drawing on the back of a paper bag with a stubby pencil. The other one had a small wooden toy that he was examining with the focused concentration of a surgeon. They were dressed clean but not new. Shirts that fit but had been washed many times. Sneakers with scuffs at the toe. The kind of dressed clean that required effort and intention and not very much money. Dante stopped walking. Something happened in his chest. Not pain. Something before pain. The warning signal the body sends before it acknowledges that something is very wrong. The boy with the pencil looked up. Just for a second, the way a child looks up at a sound without really meaning to. His eyes were dark. Not brown. A specific shade, deep and slightly amber in the outer ring. Almost black at the center, a color Dante had seen every morning in the mirror for 44 years, and on his father's face before that, and on his grandfather's face in the old photographs that sat in a locked drawer in the Moretti house. The boy looked back down at his drawing. Dante stood absolutely still. At the counter, Ferretti said, "Mr. Moretti." Quiet, careful, reading the room. Dante didn't answer. He was looking at the 2 boys the way a man looks at something that can't be right, running the calculation again, refusing the first result because the first result was not acceptable. The boy with the toy glanced up now too. The same eyes. Not similar. The same. He looked at Dante with that flat, direct child stare that has no social performance in it, just observation, and then he looked back down. Twins. The word landed in Dante's skull like something dropped from a height. He made himself move to the counter. He put his hands flat on the glass case. He could feel his own pulse in his palms. "The envelope," he said. His voice came out even. He had spent 20 years training his voice to come out even. Ferretti slid it across. "It's a little light this month," the old man said, the same way he might discuss the weather. "I can make up the difference by—" "It's fine." Dante picked up the envelope without looking at it. He had not taken his eyes fully off the two boys. "Those kids." Ferretti's face did something careful. "They're here most mornings. Their mother stops in." "Their mother? She's—" Ferretti's eyes moved to the door at the back. She stepped out to the corner. "She'll be right back." Dante set the envelope back down on the counter. He turned and looked at the two boys properly this time. Not a quick look. A look. He stood there and he looked at them until the discomfort of being stared at made the one with the pencil glance up again. "Hey," Dante said. The boy considered whether to respond. "Hey," he said finally. "What are you drawing?" The boy angled the paper bag so Dante could see it, with the casual generosity of someone who has been asked to share something not very important. It was a city, buildings, a bridge, a river, cars on a highway, dense and detailed for a child's hand, accurate in the way that children who actually study things are accurate. "That's good," Dante said. The boy shrugged, accepting this as fact rather than compliment. "What's your name?" The boy's eyes moved to his brother and back. Some small negotiation passed between them. "Marco," the boy said. "And him?" "Luca." Dante felt the name hit him somewhere between the ribs. Luca, the same name he'd given to the man standing outside on the curb. He heard the back door open. He heard footsteps. He heard the sound of a small paper bag being set on the counter, and a woman's voice saying, "Sorry, Ferretti, the line was—" She stopped. Dante turned around. Vivian Ashcroft. Vivian, who used to be Vivian Moretti for 14 months before he had killed that particular fact dead, stood in the doorway from the back with a paper bag of groceries and a look on her face that was not surprise and not fear and not anger. It was something harder than all of those. It was the look of a person who has survived something catastrophic and rebuilt themselves on the other side of it, and who has considered, probably more than once, how they would feel if they ever saw the person who caused the catastrophe. Who has rehearsed it? Who has decided what their face would do? Her face was doing exactly what she had decided. Nothing. She had cut her hair shorter than he remembered. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there. She was thinner. She was 37 years old, and she looked like someone who had been working very hard for a very long time without enough help or sleep. She was also, and this hit Dante in a way he couldn't account for and didn't want to examine, still the most arresting person he had ever been in a room with. "Vivian," he said. "I'm going to take the boys home," she said to Ferretti. Not to Dante. To Ferretti. "Mom," Marco still drawing. "You said we could have a roll." "We'll have something at home." "You said—" Marco. Her voice was soft, but it was final. The particular finality of a single parent who has calibrated every word to land exactly where it needs to. The boy put down the pencil. The other boy, Luca, set the wooden toy in his pocket without being asked. They both stood up. Dante looked at the two of them standing side by side and felt something move through him that he had no name for, that had no place in the architecture of who he was, that had no business existing in the chest of a man like him. "I need to talk to you," he said to Vivian. "I don't have anything to say to you." She didn't look at him. She was helping Marco with his jacket. "Vivian, Mr. Moretti." She said his name like a title, not a name, like something official and distant. She looked at him then, just for a second, with eyes that had burned all the way down to ash, and were not going to let him pretend otherwise. "We're leaving." She took the boys out the front door. The bell rang. Dante stood at the counter of the cracked window bakery and listened to the sound of it settling back into silence and felt the floor shift under him in a way it had never shifted. Not in 20 years of courtrooms and back rooms and moments when men had pointed weapons at him and he had remained perfectly still. He picked up the envelope from the counter. He put it in his pocket. How long? He said to Ferretti. The old man's eyes were on his tray of rolls. They've been coming in about 2 years since she moved back to the neighborhood. You knew who she was. I knew she used to be Mrs. Moretti. A pause. A lot of people in this neighborhood knew. Dante said nothing. She's good people, Ferretti said carefully. Those boys are good boys. She's done right by them. Another pause, shorter, without much help from anyone. Dante walked out. On the sidewalk, Luca was standing by the car, scrolling through something on his phone. He looked up. He took one look at Dante's face and put the phone in his pocket. You okay, boss? Get in the car, Dante said. They drove back to the Moretti house in Gravesend in complete silence. Caruso, who had been driving Dante for 9 years and had learned to read the silences with considerable precision, did not play the radio. Luca, who was 26 and still occasionally made the mistake of speaking when he shouldn't, opened his mouth once and closed it again when he caught Caruso's eyes in the rearview mirror. Dante sat in the back seat with his hands in his lap and stared at the city scrolling past the window and thought about 2 small boys with amber-dark eyes sitting at a table in a bakery that didn't have a name anymore. He was very good at not feeling things. He had built an entire life on being very good at not feeling things. He had learned it young, from a father who expressed affection through expectation and disappointment, from a world that treated softness as a liability, and he had refined it into something so complete that most of the people around him had stopped expecting anything else. Even when Elena, his mother, had died, he had stood at the graveside with his face doing nothing and his hands in his pockets and felt the grief process itself somewhere deep and remote, like weather in another country. He was not very good at what was happening to him right now, because the math was not complicated. He had left Vivian in the spring of 2015. He had sat down across from her in the kitchen of the apartment they shared on Cobble Hill. The good apartment, the one with the bay windows and the Sicilian tile in the kitchen that she had picked out. And he had told her with the same calm that he brought to every difficult conversation that he was not going to do this anymore. That he had tried. That the life she wanted, something quieter, something with children in it, something that resembled the ordinary world, was not the life he was built for. That the organization needed him in ways a family could not accommodate. He had watched her face absorb every word like a blow, and he had not allowed himself to feel it. He had moved out that week. The divorce had been processed in 6 months, clean, legal, final. He had not seen her since the day he signed the papers. And now there were 2 boys, twins, 9 years old by the look of them, which meant she had been pregnant when he left, which meant she had been pregnant when he sat across from her at the Sicilian tile table and told her with his perfectly calibrated calm that he was not going to do this anymore. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. She hadn't told him. He turned that over. He had been in the back seat of this car for 20 minutes, and he kept turning it over and landing in the same place. She had been pregnant, and she had not told him, and she had raised 2 sons alone for 9 years while he had built a criminal empire, and never once, "Caruso," he said. "Boss. Pull over." Caruso pulled over on a side street in Carroll Gardens. Dante got out and stood on the sidewalk in the thin morning light and put his hands in the pockets of his coat and breathed. Just breathed. Because the alternative to breathing was something he was not prepared to do on a public sidewalk. He stood there for 4 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock on his phone without consciously choosing to. Then he got back in the car and said, "Take me home." He spent the rest of the day running operations on autopilot, which was the only way he knew to process things that couldn't be processed directly. He sat through a meeting with Ricci about the Sunset Park docks situation and said the right things. He reviewed the monthly accounting with Sal and found 3 discrepancies and noted them without raising his voice. He ate dinner. Pasta, simply made, the kind his cook knew to make when Dante had said nothing about what he wanted, and tasted none of it. At 11 o'clock at night, he sat in the leather chair in his study with a glass of whiskey he hadn't drunk and the lights low, and he did what he had been circling for 14 hours. He thought about her face in that doorway, not the absence of surprise or fear. He had expected that, or something like it. He had known, somewhere in the low-frequency processing that ran beneath everything else, that if he ever saw Vivian Ashcroft again, she would not fall apart. She was not a woman who fell apart. That was one of the things that had drawn him to her, back at the beginning. that specific quality of standing in her own ground that he had recognized as similar to something in himself, before he understood that they were using that same quality for completely opposite purposes. He had used it to wall things out. She had used it to hold things in. What he had not expected was the particular quality of her stillness in that doorway. Not absence, not numbness, something more deliberate than either. The stillness of a person who has decided that this moment, when it came, would not take anything more from her. She had looked at him the way you look at something that cost you enormously, and that you have paid, and that you are not going to pay again. And then she had helped Marco with his jacket and walked out. He set the whiskey down. He picked up his phone. He called a number. "I need you to find something for me," he said when the call connected. "Everything you can find on Vivian Ashcroft. Current address, financial situation, employment, everything." And he stopped. He made himself say the next part. "The 2 children, birth records, medical records if you can get them." A pause. "Whatever there is." He hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. The files came back in pieces over the next 3 days, and each piece was worse than the one before it. She had moved 6 times in 9 years. He counted the addresses, 4 different boroughs, 1 stint in New Jersey. The pattern of it told a story that didn't need much interpretation. Each move had followed a gap in employment or a spike in her medical records, which his man had gotten through a contact at the hospital system, which Dante was not going to examine the ethics of right now. The medical records. He spread the pages on his desk and read them twice, and then sat very still and read them a 3rd time. Twin pregnancy. High risk from the beginning. She was 30 at the time, and the twins had been mono-mono, sharing an amniotic sac, which carried risks he had to look up separately and then wished he hadn't. She had been hospitalized 3 times during the pregnancy. The delivery had been emergency cesarean at 32 weeks, the boys underweight, both of them in the NICU for 41 days. The bills from those 41 days, he had the billing records too, were a number that made something close over in his chest. She had had no insurance at the time of delivery. She had lost her job at the design firm when the pregnancy complications had required her to stop working at 24 weeks, and the coverage had lapsed. He read the payment history on the bills, small monthly payments, irregular, stretched out over years. Some of them so small they barely covered the interest. The most recent payment had been 3 months ago. She was still paying off the birth of her sons 9 years later. He turned to the employment records. She had worked, he counted, 11 different jobs since the boys were born. Office administration, retail, a short stretch at a flower wholesaler in the Bronx, 2 years as a bookkeeper for a dry cleaning chain until the chain went under. Currently, she was doing accounts receivable for a small construction company in Greenpoint, part-time. The salary was not a number that made sense against the cost of raising 2 children in New York City. He closed the files. He stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the garden, which was kept by a man Dante paid well, and which was currently lit by the security lights so that the hedges cast long, precise shadows on the stone path. He looked at the garden and thought about a woman he had left with nothing, pregnant and uninsured and alone. And he thought about 41 days in a NICU and 11 jobs and 6 moves in 9 years and small monthly payments that barely covered the interest. He thought about a boy named Marco drawing a city on the back of a paper bag with a stubby pencil because there was no money for a sketchbook. He thought about 2 kids who were his sons and who had grown up not knowing he existed and whom he did not know at all, had not known for a single day of their lives, not one first step or first word or first day of school or fever in the night. And he put one hand flat on the cold glass of the window and held it there until he felt the cold go all the way up his arm. He went back to Carver Street the next morning, not to the bakery. He sat in the car half a block up from the building she lived in, a narrow 4-story walk-up with a fire escape that needed painting and a buzzer panel where half the names were written in pencil. And he waited. She came out at 7:20 with the 2 boys, one on each side of her, both of them with backpacks that were too big for them in the way that children's backpacks always look, the way that makes them look like they're being gently pulled backward. She was carrying a canvas tote and moving at the practiced pace of a person who has timed a morning commute to the minute. Marco was talking. Luca was walking with his hands in his pockets, looking at the sidewalk with the specific focus of a kid processing something interior. Dante watched her stop at the corner and check both directions and put a hand briefly on Luca's shoulder. Just a touch, just the contact of a hand that knows exactly where to land, and then take them across the street. He sat in the car until she turned the corner. Then he had Caruso pull around and drive slowly past the building. He looked at it. He looked at the buzzer panel with its pencil-written names. He looked at the fire escape. "Take me to see Reyes," he said. Reyes was his head of finance, a precise, unhurried man who had been with the Moretti organization for 15 years and who had the kind of comprehensive financial intelligence that governments spend considerable money trying to replicate. He worked out of a dry goods office in Sunset Park that smelled of cardboard and old coffee and was filled with filing cabinets that looked like they belonged in 1985 and contained information worth considerably more than that. Dante sat across from him and said, "I need to move some money." Reyes opened a fresh notepad. He didn't ask questions unless Dante gave him reason to. This was one of his better qualities. "There's a debt," Dante said. "Medical. I want it cleared. The whole thing, principal and interest and fees, whatever they've attached to it. I want it gone." He slid a piece of paper across the desk with the billing account number he had copied from the records. "Anonymously. Something plausible. A charitable write-down, a grant, whatever makes sense. I don't want her to know it came from me." Reyes looked at the number. He wrote it down. "Timeline? 3 days. Done." He paused. "What else?" "There's a school on Carver Street, public elementary, PS 214. I want to know its capital needs, building, equipment, programs. I want a full assessment, and then I want it funded." He paused. Again, anonymous. "A foundation, something clean. Have the lawyer set it up." Reyes made another note. He looked up. "You want me to ask about timing or as fast as it can be done legitimately?" Reyes nodded. He started to close the notepad. "One more thing," Dante said. "The neighborhood around Carver Street. Richie's crew has been running collections up there. 3rd Thursday of the month. Standard rate. Pull them." Reyes looked at him. It was not an expression of challenge. Reyes did not challenge. But it was an expression of something, a very slight recalibration in his face. "Pull them entirely?" he said. "The whole block. 6 blocks around it. I want that neighborhood clean. The Dominguez crew has been moving into that corridor. Then have Ricci's men watch it without collecting." Dante stood up. "I want that neighborhood protected. Not taxed, protected." He left. In the car going back, Luca, who had been with him today instead of Caruso, looked at him once in the rearview mirror and then looked at the road. Dante appreciated that about Luca. The boy knew where the lines were. He gave it a week. He told himself it was strategy, that he needed to understand the situation fully before he approached her, that going back to Carver Street without a plan was the kind of move that produced bad outcomes. He told himself that while he ran normal operations, attended a sit-down with the Vianello family about a disputed waterfront lease, reviewed a report from his man in Chicago about supply chain complications, and signed off on 3 new arrangements that added 7 figures to the monthly operating revenue. He was very busy. He was very good at being very busy. On the 7th night, he drove to Carver Street alone, which he never did, which Luca would have been distressed to know about if Dante had not waited until Luca left for the evening. He parked down the block from the building and he sat there with the engine off. The lights were on in what he had worked out was her apartment, 3rd floor, rear-facing, but the living room windows faced the side street. He could see the light moving once, which might have been a television. He could see what might have been a shadow crossing the window. He sat in the car for 40 minutes. Then he started the engine and drove home, because he was a grown man who had ordered hits and testified before grand juries and walked into rooms where men intended to kill him and walked out again, and he could not figure out how to walk up to a door and ring a buzzer. He found out through Ferretti. He had started going to the bakery. Not on collection days. There was no collection anymore. He had quietly absorbed the Carver Street accounts into the charitable write-down so that Ferretti's protection was simply given, though Ferretti didn't know the mechanism of it. But in the morning, early, for coffee. He sat at the table by the window and drank coffee and had conversations with Ferretti that were about nothing and gradually became about something. in the way that conversations with older men in small establishments often do. Ferretti was 71. He had been on Carver Street for 40 years. He knew everyone. "She came in upset yesterday," Ferretti said one morning, refilling Dante's cup without being asked. "The woman with the boys. Vivian. She got a letter about the medical bills." He was looking at the pastry case, straightening things that didn't need straightening. "All paid," it said. "Some foundation. She read it 3 times, standing right there." He gestured at the counter. Dante said nothing. "She cried," Ferretti said. Not dramatically, just reporting. "She had to turn around and look at the wall for a minute so the boys wouldn't see." He picked up a cloth and wiped the counter. "She's very private about what things cost her. The boys don't know how close the margins are." Dante wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. The cup was warm. He focused on that. "What did she do?" he said. "After. She thanked me, as if I'd done something." Ferretti's eyes moved to Dante for just a moment, steady and unaccusatory. "I told her it was her good luck and she should take it." The next morning, Dante arrived at the bakery to find a hand-addressed envelope on the table by the window, which Ferretti produced from under the counter with the expression of a man who is delivering something he was asked to deliver and is not going to comment on. Inside the envelope was a letter. 2 sentences, handwritten in the precise, slightly crowded handwriting he remembered from notes she used to leave on the kitchen counter. "I know it was you. Send it back." He folded the letter. He put it in his inside pocket. He finished his coffee. He went back out onto Carver Street and walked to the building with the fire escape that needed painting and the pencil-written buzzer panel, and he pressed the button next to the name Ashcroft V, and he stood on the step and waited. The buzzer crackled. A pause. "No," she said. Just that. One word. Like a door closing. He pressed the button again. "Vivian, I need to talk to you." Another pause. He could hear very faintly the sound of the apartment, a television or radio, a small domestic sound. "I heard you the first time," she said through the crackle. "I said no." "I'm not going to stop coming back." The silence after this was longer, long enough that he thought she might simply not respond at all, might go back into the apartment and leave him on the step until he gave up, which was, he acknowledged, a reasonable and deserved response. 3 minutes, she said finally. The front door. The lock buzzed, and he went in. She was waiting at the landing between the first and second floors, not in the apartment, not inviting him into the space where her boys were, which he noted and understood. She had her arms crossed, and she was wearing the clothes of a person who had been home for a few hours. Dark jeans, a gray pullover, her feet in wool socks on the linoleum floor. She looked at him with the same blank precision she'd had in the bakery doorway. "The boys are asleep," she said. "I know, I'm sorry for the hour." "You're not sorry for anything. You're doing what you want, like you always do." She said it without heat, which was worse than heat. 3 minutes. He had thought about what to say. He had thought about it for 2 weeks, going over approaches, considering and discarding, which was how he approached every difficult thing. Careful preparation, clear objective, controlled execution. He had done that, and it had produced exactly nothing useful, because there was no prepared thing to say to a woman who had raised your sons alone for 9 years and asked you to send your money back. So he said, "I didn't know." Her face changed. Very small shift, nearly invisible. But he had spent 14 months of his life learning to read her face, and some of that knowledge was apparently permanent. "I know you didn't," she said. "You didn't tell me." "No." He waited. "You said you didn't want children," she said. "Those were your exact words, sitting across from me at that table. Not yet, or not now. You didn't want children. You said it the way you say things when you've decided, and you want the other person to understand that the decision is final." Her voice was still without heat, but something in it had gotten harder. "I found out 6 weeks after you left, and I thought about calling you. I thought about it a lot, actually. And then I remembered how you sounded when you said it." She paused. "So I didn't call." Dante stood on the landing and felt the weight of that land on him. You would have sent money," she said, "and you would have felt that was sufficient. And my sons would have grown up knowing their father chose an organization over them. She met his eyes. I decided they were better off with the story I told them. What story? That their father died before they were born. She said it flat, watching him. That he was a good man who didn't get the chance. The thing that happened in his chest at this was not pain. It was more specific than pain. He made himself hold it without showing it, because he had no right to make this about his reaction, and because she was watching him to see what he would do with it. They're going to find out, he said. They might. Vivian, the 3 minutes are up, she said. Good night, Mr. Moretti. She went back up the stairs. He stood on the landing and listened to the soft sound of her sock feet on the linoleum going up, until he heard a door close quietly above him. Close quietly so the boys wouldn't wake. He let himself out of the building. On Carver Street at night, the air smelled of exhaust and something from a restaurant 2 blocks over. Dante Moretti stood on the sidewalk in his overcoat and looked up at the building with its fire escape that needed painting, and understood, with a clarity that felt like a cold window pressed against the face, that he had broken something he had not known he possessed and had never had the chance to know, and that the person who had kept that broken thing alive and whole despite him was standing 1 floor up in wool socks, waiting for him to leave. He began to walk toward where he'd parked. His phone rang. It was Ricci. The voice on the other end had a quality Dante recognized immediately, the particular controlled urgency of a man delivering bad news that couldn't wait. We've got a problem, Ricci said. The Falcone crew. They know about the Carver Street location. Dante stopped walking. What do you mean they know? He said. They've been watching it. Santos picked up the tail this afternoon, but 2 of Falcone's men, sitting on a car half a block from the building. They're not there for the bakery. The cold came back. Not the window cold of grief, but the different cold of threat, which Dante had lived inside long enough that his body responded to it before his mind did, going still and focused the way a still pond goes flat before a storm. They were watching her building, which meant someone had connected the pieces, had seen him there, had run the name, had found the history, had figured out what he had figured out standing in a bakery 2 weeks ago. How long? Dante said. We think since Tuesday. 4 days. 4 days they had been sitting on the building where his son slept. Get Caruso and 2 more and put them on the building tonight, he said. Right now, Ricci, not tomorrow morning, and find out what Falcone knows. He turned around. He went back to the door with the pencil-written buzzer panel and rang the button for Ashcroft V. The crackle. A wait. I told you. Vivian. He kept his voice level. He kept it level the way you keep a hand steady when it wants to shake. I need you to listen to me. Don't open the door. Just listen. A silence. There are men watching your building, he said. They are not my men. I need you to take the boys to a different location tonight, right now. Do you understand? The silence was longer this time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The control was still there. She had the same reflex for control that he did. He had always known that about her. But underneath it was something that had nothing to do with him, that was purely about the 2 sleeping boys 1 floor above her. What kind of men? She said. The kind that are watching your building because of who I am, he said, which is my fault, which I am going to fix. But I need you to move tonight. Another silence. Where? She said. Dante looked at the building across the street. He looked at Carver Street at night, at the restaurant light 2 blocks over, at the parked cars, at the ordinary dark. He thought about Marco drawing a city with a stubby pencil. He thought about Luca with his hands in his pockets looking at the sidewalk. He thought about a woman turning toward a wall in a bakery so her sons wouldn't see her cry. Somewhere safe, he said. I'll make sure of that much. The door buzzed open, and somewhere across the city, in a building he had never seen, a man named Falcone made a phone call that would change what the next 48 hours looked like. Would change everything. In fact, though Dante didn't know that yet, standing in a doorway on Carver Street with his hand on the frame and 9 years of his own absence pressing down on him like a hand on the back of his neck. The door buzzed and Dante went up. She was waiting in the hallway outside the apartment with Marco and Luca already beside her, both of them blinking in the way of children pulled from sleep, rumpled, slow, operating on instinct without the context to understand the instinct. Marco had a jacket on over his pajamas. Luca was holding his shoes, not wearing them. Vivian had a canvas duffel on her shoulder, and her jaw set at the angle Dante remembered from every argument they'd ever had. The angle that said she had already made the calculation and didn't need his input on the result. She looked at him in the hallway light and said, "You have 10 seconds to tell me where we're going before I take them to my neighbor instead." "I have a house in Cobble Hill," he said. "Secure. My men will be outside all night." "Your men?" Something moved across her face. "You mean the same organization that made us a target?" "Yes." She held his eyes. Behind her, Marco was trying to understand what was happening through the fog of interrupted sleep. Luca had sat down in the hallway to put his shoes on, laces careful and methodical, even half asleep, as if this were ordinary. "Fine," she said, not because she trusted him, because the option was her son's in a building with unknown men outside watching it, and she was not the kind of person who chose pride over her children. They went down the stairs and out into Carver Street. Dante had texted Caruso from the 3rd step up. The Escalade was already at the curb. Caruso was out of the car, scanning the street with the practiced thoroughness of a man who had done it for 9 years without incident because he did it thoroughly. Ricci had another car 20 yards back with 2 men in it who were watching the ends of the block in opposite directions. Marco stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the Escalade and then looked at Dante. "Are you a cop?" he said. "No," Dante said. "Then what are you?" Vivian put her hand on his shoulder. "Get in the car, Marco." "Mom?" "Marco." He got in the car. Luca had already gotten in, still without apparent curiosity, with the self-contained quality that Dante had noticed in the bakery, the quality of a child who has learned that asking too many questions doesn't always produce useful answers. Dante got in the front. Vivian sat in the back between the 2 boys, her bag on her lap, looking out the window. She did not look at Dante. She watched the street scroll by with the focused attention of someone memorizing a route, which she was. Nobody spoke for the 12 minutes it took to reach Cobble Hill. The house was the right house for this purpose, not the Moretti compound in Gravesend, which was a statement about power, but the Cobble Hill brownstone, which was a statement about nothing because it was registered in a name that couldn't be connected to Dante without 4 layers of legal architecture. He used it rarely. It was clean and kept and impersonal in the way of houses where no one actually lived. He had never taken a woman there. He had never taken anyone there who mattered. He took them inside and showed Vivian the 2 bedrooms on the upper floor. She looked at both of them with the appraising, unsentimental efficiency of a woman who has moved 6 times in 9 years and has learned to assess a space in 30 seconds. "This one," she said, pointing to the larger one. "Both of them in here with me. There's a lock on the door." "I see that." She took the boys in. Marco stood in the middle of the room and turned once, slowly, taking it in with the dawning awareness of a kid whose sleep fog was beginning to lift, and who was starting to understand that something unusual was happening. "Mom," he said, "who is that man?" Vivian was already pulling back the coverlid on the bed. "Someone from the neighborhood. Go to sleep." "He doesn't look like someone from the neighborhood." "Marco." He went to sleep. Or he got into bed, which was close enough. Vivian came back to the doorway. She stood in it with one hand on the frame and looked at Dante in the hallway. And the quality of that look, exhausted, stripped of everything that wasn't essential, was the closest thing to honest she had shown him since the bakery. "How serious is it?" she said. Quiet, so the boys wouldn't hear. "I don't know yet. Ricci is finding out." "How did they connect me to you?" "I don't know that either." He paused. "I came to your building 4 times this week. I was probably followed on one of them." Her jaw tightened. "So they found us because you came back?" "Yes." She looked at him. She let him sit with that. "How long do we have to stay here?" she said. "Until I know what we're dealing with." "I have work tomorrow. The boys have school. I'll handle it." "You'll handle it," she repeated, and the 2 words carried the weight of 9 years of handling everything herself, carried it without dramatics, just let the weight show for a second before she pulled it back. "Good night, Dante." She closed the door. He heard the lock turn. He went downstairs and sat in the kitchen with his phone and waited for Ricci to call. Ricci called at 2:40 in the morning. "It's Falcone's nephew," he said. "Eddie Falcone. He's been running surveillance on the Moretti operation for 6 weeks, trying to map our soft spots before the old man makes a move on the docks situation. And he connected her to me. He's got a guy in the DMV, ran the plates on your car when you were on Carver Street, pulled your history, found the marriage record." A pause. "He knows about the boys, Dante." Dante sat very still at the kitchen table in a house that smelled of unused rooms and furniture polish. "What does he know about the boys?" he said. "That they exist, that they're yours." Another pause, shorter. "Eddie's smart. He's 28 and he wants to prove something to his uncle. He's the kind of smart that looks for leverage. Get me a location on Eddie Falcone." "Already working on it." "Ricci." He said it carefully. "I want this clean. No messages, no escalation, no bodies on the Falcone doorstep. Just information. I need to understand what they intend before I respond." "You sure you want clean?" "For now, yes." He hung up. He sat in the kitchen until the light outside began to change, from black to the deep blue that comes an hour before actual dawn, and he thought about a 28-year-old who had found the only real lever that had ever existed against Dante Moretti. He had spent 20 years being unleverable. He had built it deliberately. No attachment, no dependence, no person whose safety could be used to redirect his hand. He had believed, and the belief had been correct up until approximately 3 weeks ago, that a man without family was a man without vulnerability. He had been correct, and he had been exactly wrong. Vivian came downstairs at 6. She was dressed, her hair pulled back, the canvas bag over her shoulder. She looked at him at the kitchen table, the coffee he'd made, the phone beside his hand, the fact that he was still in the same clothes and had clearly not slept, with an expression that was not sympathy and not its absence but something more complicated. "Coffee," he said. "I see it." She poured a cup and stood with her back to the counter. "What did you find out?" He told her, straightforward, no softening. She listened with her eyes on the middle distance and her cup held in both hands. When he finished, she said, "How dangerous." "Right now, uncertain. Eddie Falcone is ambitious, not reckless. He'll use information before he uses anything else." "What does that mean for us?" "It means you can't go back to Carver Street yet." She looked at him. "Dante, I have a job. The boys have school. I can arrange." "I know what you can arrange." Her voice sharpened, just the edge of it, controlled immediately. "That's not the point. The point is that we had a life, a small, difficult, carefully managed life that I built by myself, and you walked onto my street 3 weeks ago, and now there are men outside my building." She set the cup down. "You understand that I'm not angry at you for coming back. I'm angry at you for what came with you." "I know that." "Do you?" She looked at him steadily. "Because I need you to understand something, Dante. What you pay for doesn't make it right. The bills, the school." "I found out about the school," Ferretti told me. He couldn't help himself. "None of that makes it right. You can't buy back 9 years." "I'm not trying to buy them back." "Then what are you trying to do?" The question sat between them in the kitchen light, and Dante, who had an answer to almost every question put to him, did not have one for this, or had one that was too large to compress into the moment, that would sound like too much if he said it now. That would sound like performance. "I'm trying to fix what I can fix," he said. "You can't fix what matters." "I know that too." The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the silence of two people who have said things that needed saying and who are now sitting with the residue of them. Vivian picked her cup back up. Outside, the city was starting. You could hear the first buses, the first deliveries, the sound of a neighborhood coming back to life. "The boys can't know who you are," she said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need to think about it." "I understand." "You being around them. That's not a decision I've made. I haven't made it." "I understand that too." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't categorize. Not softness, not hardness, something in between that was more exhausted than either. They're going to need to miss school today, she said. I'll call the office and work from here. Vivian, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm telling you what's happening. She picked up her phone from the counter. And Dante, I need you to understand that this, staying here, letting your men watch the building, this is not me forgiving you. This is me making a choice about my son's safety. Those are different things. I know they're different, he said. She went to make the calls. Marco found him in the kitchen at 8. He came downstairs with his hair flattened on one side from sleep and his pajama jacket on under the jacket from last night, which he had apparently put back on out of habit. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Dante, and they looked at each other across the kitchen with the mutual assessment of two people who haven't decided yet what they are to each other. Mom said we're staying here today, Marco said. Yes. How come? There's something that needs to be sorted out in the neighborhood. It's temporary. Marco came in and opened the refrigerator with the confidence of someone who has decided that if you're staying in a place, you might as well eat. He looked at the contents. You don't have much. I don't live here. Then whose house is it? Mine, Dante said. I just don't stay here often. Marco closed the refrigerator. He leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, which was a stance Dante had never seen on a 9-year-old, but which landed with a precision that felt familiar in a way he didn't want to examine too directly. You were at the bakery, Marco said. Ferretti's. Yes. You go there a lot now. Recently, yes. Ferretti says you're from the neighborhood. The boy looked at him with those amber dark eyes that had no social performance in them, just assessment. But you don't seem like you're from the neighborhood. I grew up in Gravesend, Dante said. It's close. Gravesend is not the neighborhood. No, Dante agreed. It's not. A pause. Marco unfolded his arms and pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat down in it backwards, arms over the back, looking at Dante with the expression of someone conducting a patient investigation. You know my mom from before, he said, not a question. Yes, Dante said. From how long ago? Dante looked at the boy, at his son. Though the word had no purchase yet, no texture, no weight that he had the right to apply, and thought about what Vivian had said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He thought about a woman in wool socks saying those are different things. A long time ago, he said. Marco considered this. He didn't push it. He had the quality of someone who had filed information for later use, which was the quality Dante recognized with a sharpness he wasn't prepared for, of a child who had grown up understanding that some questions didn't produce complete answers, and that pressing harder didn't change that. He had learned that from his mother. Do you have cereal? Marco said. Dante stood up. I'll find something. Dr. Tram. Ricci called at 10 with a location on Eddie Falcone and with something else. He made contact, Ricci said. Not with us directly. He went through Vianello, used Vianello as a back channel. A pause. He wants a meeting. With me. With you. He's proposing a negotiation on the docks arrangement. But Dante, the way he worded it, through Vianello. Another pause, more deliberate. He mentioned that he was aware of your personal situation. That was the phrase, your personal situation. Dante was standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, his back to the wall, his voice low. He mentioned it to Vianello, he said. To Vianello, who told his capo, who told us. Ricci's voice carried a quality Dante rarely heard in it, the quality of genuine concern under professional neutrality. He's spreading it. Even if you meet him and make a deal, Dante, he's already put it out there. Vianello knows, which means the others will know within the week. At most. Dante stood in the hallway of a house that wasn't his home and listened to the city sound coming through the walls, muffled, ordinary, indifferent, and felt the architecture of the thing close around him like a hand. He had spent 20 years making himself unleverable, and the lever had existed the entire time. Growing up in a walk-up on Carver Street with a backpack too big for its body, drawing cities on paper bags. He had built it himself by leaving. Set up the meeting, he said. Tomorrow. The place on Wythe, not the Gravesend house. Neutral enough that he'll come, controlled enough that I can manage it. You sure about meeting him? No, set it up anyway. He went back to the kitchen. Marco had found a box of crackers in the back of a cabinet and was arranging them in a pattern on the table that appeared to be architectural, a building plan, or possibly a city grid. Luca had come downstairs at some point and was sitting across from him, watching the arrangement with the focused patience of someone who has seen this before and has learned to appreciate it. Dante stood in the doorway and watched his two sons at the kitchen table and felt something move through him that was not guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it, and was not grief exactly, though grief was part of that too. It was something more specific, the recognition of what a day in an ordinary kitchen looked like, of what it felt like to be present in a room where two children were simply existing, and the understanding that this was what he had said he didn't want, what he had cut away with his calibrated calm at a Sicilian tile table, and that the cutting had been the worst thing he had ever done, worse than everything he could be legally charged with or morally condemned for, worse than all of it combined. He made them eggs. He didn't know if he made them well. He cooked infrequently and without much attention, but he made them and put plates on the table, and the two boys ate with the uncomplicated appetite of children who had been awake for 2 hours. Marco said the eggs were okay. Luca ate 3/4 of his and moved the rest to the edge of the plate without comment. Vivian came down while they were eating. She saw the plates. She saw the pan in the sink. She looked at Dante with an expression he couldn't read and sat down and didn't say anything. He poured her coffee and put it in front of her and sat down on the other side of the table, and they sat in the kitchen, the four of them, in the impersonal house that smelled of furniture polish. And it was the most ordinary thing Dante Moretti had done in 20 years. And it cost him more to hold his face still through it than anything he had faced across a table in any back room in any city in his life. Sal came to the house at noon. Dante had not asked for Sal. Sal's arrival meant that someone had told him where Dante was, which meant Luca had talked, which meant this was going to be a conversation Dante had been expecting and would have preferred to have somewhere other than this kitchen. Sal Moretti was Dante's uncle, his father's younger brother, 63 years old, a man who had been in the organization his entire adult life, and who carried the Moretti history in his face the way old buildings carry their history in the walls. He was not a violent man by disposition. He was a practical man, which in the context of the Moretti family had sometimes required violence, and he had always understood the distinction. He was also, Dante acknowledged, the closest thing to a conscience the organization had ever had, which was not the same as being a moral man, but was something. He came into the kitchen and looked at the eggs pan in the sink and the 4 cups on the table and the canvas duffel by the stairs, and his face did a comprehensive inventory in about 4 seconds. Then he looked at Dante. "Outside," Dante said. They went to the back garden. The garden here was smaller than Gravesend, a narrow strip with a table and 2 metal chairs that had oxidized and a planter box with nothing in it. Sal sat in one of the chairs with the deliberateness of a man who intends to stay until the conversation is complete. "The Falcone kid," Sal said. "Ricci told you." "Ricci tells me things when he's concerned. He's concerned." Sal looked at him with the particular patience of someone who has known you your entire life and has been through enough with you that directness is the only remaining option. "How bad is it?" "Manageable." "Is the woman here?" "Her name is Vivian." "Is Vivian here?" "Yes." A silence. A pigeon landed on the planter box and looked at them with the absolute moral neutrality of a pigeon and left. "She was pregnant when you left," Sal said. "Yes." "You didn't know?" "No." "She didn't tell you?" "No." Dante sat in the other chair. "She made a decision." "She made a reasonable decision," Sal said, which surprised Dante and apparently surprised him too, because he added, "given what she knew about you at the time, which was accurate." Dante said nothing. "The boys," Sal said. "How old?" 9. Sal looked at the empty planter box. He breathed out through his nose. "Your father," he said, "had a saying. A man who thinks he can choose between his blood and his business has never understood either one." Papa had a lot of sayings. This one he meant. Sal turned to look at him.
Eddie Falcone is 28 years old with something to prove. He's told Vianello. He'll tell whoever else gives him leverage. Within 2 weeks, every family in New York is going to know that Dante Moretti has twin sons living in a Carver Street walk-up and that their mother is a civilian. He said it with the clinical thoroughness of a man laying out a problem because the problem needs to be laid out before it can be addressed. That makes them a target. That makes her a target. Every crew that has a grievance with us, and there are several, as you know, is going to look at those boys and see an opportunity. I know. So what are you going to do about it? Dante looked at the garden, at the oxidized chairs, the empty planter, the narrow strip of city sky above the back wall. I'm going to meet with Eddie tomorrow, he said, and I'm going to make him understand that what he's doing has consequences. And if he doesn't care about the consequences? Everyone cares about the consequences. They just need the right framing. Sal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dante, these boys, are you going to be in their lives or not? Because there's a difference between protecting them from outside your door and being their father. The word landed the way it always landed now, with the particular gravity of something that had been abstract and was no longer. I don't know yet, Dante said. That's not my decision alone. No, Sal said. It's not. He stood up. He straightened his coat. He looked down at Dante with the expression of a man who is older and has seen more and has stopped needing the younger man to arrive at the same conclusions, but who cares enough to keep watching? The organization is going to have opinions about this, he said, about the exposure, about what it means for operations if you're distracted. You should know that. I know it. The captains will want a meeting. They can want whatever they want. Sal looked at him for another second. Something in his face settled. Not approval exactly, but something adjacent to it. She seems capable, he said. She is. Good. He moved toward the door. She'll need to be. He went back through the house and out the front door, and Dante sat in the oxidized chair in the narrow garden and let the midday city sound wash over him, and thought about captains who would want a meeting and a 28-year-old who was spreading information like a man sowing ground with something he intended to harvest. He thought about Luca at the table, moving the last of his eggs to the edge of the plate without comment. He thought about what Sal had said. The right framing. That evening, Vivian found him in the front room. He was on the phone, Ricci again, the third call of the afternoon, confirming logistics for tomorrow's meeting with Eddie. He held up one finger and she stopped in the doorway. When he finished the call, he set the phone on the table. She came into the room and stood in the middle of it and looked at him with the same direct, stripped-down quality she'd had in the hall of her building, the quality of a woman who has decided that something needs to be said and is going to say it. Marco asked me tonight who you are, she said. What did you tell him? I told him you were someone I used to know. A pause. He said, is he our dad? The room was very quiet. What did you say? Dante said. I didn't say anything. She looked at him steadily. I didn't say anything, and he looked at me for a long time in the way he does, and then he went to brush his teeth. Her voice was even. She was working to keep it even and doing a good job. He's 9 years old, Dante. He's been asking about his father since he was 4. I have told that child more times than I can count a story about a good man who died before he was born. I have watched him build that story in his head into something that helped him. She stopped. And now you're here. Dante said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate. I'm not asking you to leave, she said. I'm telling you that if you are going to be near them, near him, you have to decide what you are to them. Not next year, not when it's convenient, before he asks me again. Her voice dropped. Not softer, more compressed. Because I am not going to lie to my son about his father while his father is standing in the next room. Vivian, I'm not finished. She held his eyes. If you decide you want to be in their lives, I will not stop you. I don't think I could stop you if I tried. And I don't think stopping you is the right thing for them. But I need you to understand what you're asking. You're asking to step into a life you were absent from for 9 years, into 2 boys who have built themselves into complete people without you, and you're asking to matter to them. She stopped. And if you step in and then leave again, if you decide it's too complicated or too much, or that the organization needs you more,
I will not be able to fix what that does to them. Do you understand me? I could not fix that. He stood up. Not to move. Just because sitting felt wrong for this, felt too passive for the weight of what she was saying. I understand, he said. Do you? Her eyes didn't move. Because you understood things before. You understood what you were choosing when you left. You understood it clearly, and you chose it anyway. Yes, he said. I did. So what's different? He looked at her across the quiet room of an impersonal house, and he thought about Marco asking, "Is he our dad?" and looking at his mother in the way he does, and then going to brush his teeth. And he thought about all the years of a man's life that could be contained in a 9-year-old brushing his teeth at night in a building his father had never visited. And he said, I saw them. That's different. I didn't know they existed, and then I saw them, and now I can't. He stopped, started again. I know that's not a good enough answer. I know I saw them is not compensation for 9 years, but it's the true answer. Vivian looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. Not forgiveness, not welcome, just the word, provisionally, like a door left an inch open. She went upstairs. Dante stood in the front room and picked up his phone and called Ricci and said, "The meeting tomorrow. I want it airtight. Every angle covered. I'm not going in there distracted." "Understood," Ricci said. "There's one more thing." "What?" "Falcone's been making calls all afternoon. He's not just talking to Vianello anymore." A pause. "He called someone in the Brennan crew. Irish outfit. They run the North Brooklyn waterfront. They've got no love for the Morettis since the Sunset Park thing last year." Dante closed his eyes for 1 second. How deep is that conversation? We don't know yet. But Dante, if Falcone's building a coalition around this, if he's using your sons as the opening argument for why the Moretti operation is now a liability, I hear you. He's not just coming for leverage, he's coming for the whole thing. Dante opened his eyes. Through the ceiling, he could hear very faintly the sound of 2 boys settling into sleep in an unfamiliar room. The small sounds of children who were adaptable because they had been raised by a woman who had made adaptability a form of survival. And beneath that sound, barely audible, the sound of Vivian moving around the room, the ordinary sound of a person at the end of a long day in a life that had never been given enough room to breathe. He stood in the front room of a house that wasn't his home with his phone in his hand and felt, for the first time in 20 years, the specific terror of having something real to lose, and knew with absolute clarity that tomorrow's meeting with Eddie Falcone was not going to go the way Eddie Falcone expected. Because the man who walked into that room tomorrow was not the same man who had built this organization on the premise that nothing and no one could move him. He was something more dangerous than that now. He was a man who had finally found the thing he was afraid to lose. The meeting with Eddie Falcone was set for 10 in the morning at the place on Wythe Avenue, a commercial kitchen supply warehouse that the Moretti organization had held a legitimate stake in for 7 years. The kind of place where the background noise of delivery trucks and industrial equipment made recording devices unreliable, and where the layout offered 3 exits and clear sightlines in every direction. Dante had chosen it. Eddie had agreed without hesitation, which was either confidence or inexperience, and Dante was going in expecting both. He left the Cobble Hill house at 8:30. Vivian was in the kitchen with the boys, both of them doing schoolwork at the table. She had pulled assignments from their school portal on her laptop, the particular improvised normalcy of a woman who was not going to let 1 night of displacement become 2 days of disruption. Marco was doing math with the focused irritation of someone who finds math beneath his actual interests. Luca was reading something, a book with a cracked spine that he'd apparently had in his backpack, sitting sideways in the chair the way kids sit when they're comfortable enough to forget about posture. Dante stopped in the doorway. He had not intended to stop. He had intended to go straight through to the front door. Vivian looked up from the laptop. She read his face in the way she had always been able to read his face, better than anyone, which had been one of the things he had found both necessary and intolerable when they were together. "Be careful," she said. Not warmly, just accurately. He nodded and went out. Eddie Falcone was younger in person than the surveillance photos had suggested. Not younger in age, but younger in the way he held himself. the particular quality of a man who has prepared very carefully for something and whose preparation is showing. He was sitting at the metal work table in the back of the warehouse when Dante came in, two of his own men standing at the far wall, which Dante had expected and which Ricci's men had already mapped before Dante reached the building. Eddie stood up when Dante entered. He was 6 feet, dark-haired, wearing a jacket that was too good for a warehouse meeting, which told Dante something about his priorities. He put out his hand. Dante shook it. The grip was firm and controlled, the grip of a man who had practiced it. "Mr. Moretti," Eddie said, "I appreciate you making the time." "Sit down," Dante said. They sat. Dante's man, Caruso, stood at the door behind him. Ricci was in a car outside with 2 others. The arrangement was balanced, and everyone in the room understood the balance. "The dock situation," Dante said. "That's what you want to discuss." Among other things, Eddie had the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time to be in a room and is savoring the fact of the room. The Moretti operation has held the Sunset Park waterfront for how long? 11 years? 12? 12. The Falcone family's position is that the arrangement has become disproportionate, that the current split doesn't reflect the current distribution of operational weight. He said it smoothly, with the cadence of something rehearsed. "We'd like to renegotiate." "On what basis?" "On the basis that circumstances have changed." A pause. Deliberate. "In several respects." Dante looked at him across the table. He kept his face where he always kept it, level, giving nothing, the face he had built over 20 years specifically for rooms like this. "Say what you mean," Dante said. Eddie's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. "You have children, Mr. Moretti." "I'm aware of what I have." "Twin boys, 9 years old, living in Carver Street until recently." He interlaced his fingers on the table, casual, rehearsed casualness. "The organization has been run on the premise that Dante Moretti has no personal vulnerabilities. That's been the operating assumption for a long time. It's been effective." Another pause. "It's no longer accurate." "And you think that gives you leverage?" "I think it changes the landscape," Eddie said. "I think it suggests that a renegotiation is in everyone's interest, including yours." His eyes were steady. "Because if I know about those boys, others will know, and some of those others will see them differently than I do." Dante looked at him for a long moment. "How do you see them?" he said. "As a reason to reach an agreement," Eddie said, "not as a target. I want to be clear about that. I'm not threatening your family, Mr. Moretti. I'm offering you a reason to make a deal that protects everyone." The distinction Eddie was drawing was real, technically. He was not making a direct threat. He was describing a situation and implying a consequence, and allowing Dante to do the work of connecting them, which was, Dante acknowledged, reasonably sophisticated. It was also the thing that was going to be his undoing, because a man who mistakes sophistication for safety has misunderstood the room. "I need to think about it," Dante said. Eddie nodded. "Of course. Give me 48 hours. 48 hours is reasonable." Eddie stood and offered his hand again. "I think we can find something that works for both families." Dante shook the hand. He walked out through the warehouse with Caruso at his back and out into the pale morning on Wythe Avenue, and got into the car and sat in it for 30 seconds before he said anything. "He's building something," he said to Ricci. "This is not about the docks. The docks are the surface. What's underneath? Find out." He looked out the window at the street. "Pull everything we have on Eddie Falcone, not the family operation. Him specifically, where he's been spending, who he's meeting with independently, what he wants." He paused. "He came into that room too comfortable. A 28-year-old doesn't sit across from me that comfortable unless he has something he hasn't shown yet." Ricci took out his phone. Dante watched the street. Somewhere in the back of his skull, something was already telling him that the 48 hours were not going to produce what Eddie Falcone thought they were going to produce, and that the thing underneath the docks negotiation was going to be worse than the docks negotiation, and that he had been in this business long enough to know that when a young man sits across from you that comfortable, it's because he already knows what's in the room that you haven't found yet.
The call came at 4 in the afternoon. Dante was back at the Cobble Hill house. He had spent 2 hours on the phone with the organization's lawyers about the Wythe meeting and another hour with Sal about the captains, who had in fact requested a meeting, which was coming on Friday and which Dante was going to need to handle with considerable precision. He was sitting in the front room with a legal pad covered in notes when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Mr. Moretti." The voice was a woman's, low, careful, the voice of someone making a call they have thought about for a long time. "My name is Angela Rice. I'm Eddie Falcone's assistant." A pause. "I need to tell you something. Not on behalf of Eddie. On behalf of myself." Dante sat very still. "I'm listening." "The docs are not what this is about," she said. "Eddie doesn't care about the docs. He's been planning this for 3 months. The surveillance, the DM5 contact, the Vianello approach, all of it was groundwork." She stopped. He could hear her breathing, slightly elevated. "He went to your father." The sentence landed in complete silence. "My father is dead," Dante said. Flat. The words came out flat because his brain had not yet processed them into anything with dimension. "Vincent Moretti." A pause. "He's not dead, Mr. Moretti. He's been in Naples for 11 years under a different identity. Eddie found him 4 months ago." The room changed. Not physically. The walls were where they were. The legal pad was on the coffee table. The afternoon light came through the front windows at the same angle. But something fundamental about the temperature of the room shifted, the way the air shifts before something large and structural fails. Dante's father. Vincent Moretti, who had died of cardiac arrest in 2013 according to the death certificate that Dante had seen with his own eyes, that he had signed off on as next of kin. That had been the document by which he had become the head of the Moretti organization at age 31 and had spent 13 years building it into what it was. "You're telling me," Dante said, and his voice was doing the thing it always did, staying level through anything, staying perfectly level, "that my father is alive." "Yes." "And Eddie Falcone has been in contact with him." "For 4 months. Vincent has been feeding Eddie information about the organization's structure, the operations, the financial architecture." A pause. "He knows things that no one should know unless they built it, and he's been giving it to Eddie piece by piece in exchange for—" She stopped. "In exchange for what?" "Reinstatement," she said. "Vincent wants to come back. He wants what Eddie Falcone is being promised as the reward for bringing Dante Moretti down, co-leadership of a consolidated Falcone-Moretti operation, with Vincent as the senior partner." Dante sat with the phone against his ear and looked at the legal pad on the coffee table. The notes he had written were in his own handwriting, clean and organized, the handwriting of a man who had built 13 years of a criminal empire on the premise that his father was dead. His father, who had taught him everything he knew, who had told him that a man without family was a man without vulnerability, who had died of cardiac arrest in 2013 while Dante was in Chicago on organization business, who had been buried in the family plot in Gravesend before Dante got back, whose grave Dante had stood beside with his hands in his pockets and his face doing nothing. "How do you know this?" he said. "I've been Eddie's assistant for 2 years. He doesn't consider me relevant enough to be careful around." She said it without bitterness, just fact. "And I know what a man looks like when he's setting something in motion that he intends to survive. This—" She stopped again. "Eddie is not going to survive this if it goes forward. He doesn't understand what he's dealing with. He thinks Vincent Moretti is a resource. He doesn't understand that Vincent Moretti uses things until they're used up." "Why are you telling me?" A long pause. "Because I have a daughter," she said. "She's 7, and I've been sitting in that office for 2 years, and I know what these men do to people who are in the way." She stopped. "And I know you have children too, and whatever you are, Mr. Moretti, I don't think you burned down a city with children in it." He said nothing. "The meeting tomorrow," she said. "Eddie is going to present you with what he has. The full picture, the organizational intelligence from Vincent, all of it. It's going to be framed as an ultimatum. He thinks if he shows you that Vincent is alive and has given him the keys to the organization, you'll negotiate rather than fight.
He thinks it breaks you. A pause. Does it? Dante looked at the legal pad. No, he said. Then you need to move before tomorrow, she said. Because once he presents it in front of the other families, it's out. You can't put it back. She hung up. Dante sat in the front room of the Cobble Hill house for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He watched the clock on his phone without choosing to. Then he called Ricci. Get Sal, he said. Now, bring him here. And Ricci, don't call anyone else. Not the captains, not the lawyers, no one. What happened? Just get him here. He sat in the front room and listened to the house. Upstairs, he could hear the boys. Marco's voice, some kind of debate with Luca, the particular escalating register of an argument between twins who have been in a confined space for 24 hours. He could hear Vivian's voice, not the words, just the tone, coming in at the end to settle it. He picked up the legal pad and tore off the top 3 pages and held them in his hands and looked at the notes he'd made about the why the meeting, the docs, the renegotiation, the landscape of it. And then he folded them in half and put them in his pocket, because they were useless now. The landscape had been the wrong map. He had been reading the wrong map since the moment Eddie Falcone sat down across from him in a warehouse and smiled with the comfort of a man who knows what's in the room that you haven't found yet. His father was alive. He let himself think it directly, without the protective buffer of professional processing. Vincent Moretti, who had faked his own death, was alive in Naples and had spent 4 months feeding a 28-year-old the operational architecture of the organization he had built and handed to his son. And the reason, the stated reason, reinstatement, co-leadership, senior partner, was a story for Eddie Falcone's benefit, because what Dante knew about his father, what he had always known underneath everything, was that Vincent Moretti did not share and did not partner and did not negotiate terms from a position of subordination. What Vincent wanted was what he had always wanted, everything. The boys came downstairs at 5, Vivian behind them, and she stopped when she saw Dante's face. Outside, he said to her. Quiet. Marco heard it and looked at them. Luca looked at Marco, looking at them. Vivian said, 5 minutes, kitchen, to the boys, and they went. And she came across the front room to where Dante was standing and looked at him with the expression of someone reading weather. What happened? She said. My father is alive. Her face changed, not in the way of someone hearing surprising news, in the way of someone whose fundamental understanding of a structure has just been revised and who is rapidly calculating what the revision means for everything built on that structure. How? She said. Faked the death. He's been in Naples. He's been working with Falcone against the organization. He kept his voice low and steady. He's giving Eddie the operational intelligence he needs to take down what I've built. Vivian was very still. And Eddie brings this to the table tomorrow. That was the plan, yes. What does your father actually want? It was the right question. It was the question that cut through to the center in the way her questions always did, going past the surface of the thing to the mechanism underneath it. He wants back in, Dante said. That's the story. What he actually wants... He stopped. My father built this organization. He built it over 30 years and he handed it to me because there was no other choice. I was the only one who could hold it. But he never believed anyone could hold it better than him. He never believed that about anyone in his life. He paused. He's been dead for 11 years. He's been watching from Naples while I built it into something larger than what he gave me. And that is not something my father could tolerate indefinitely. Vivian absorbed this. So he's using Eddie to take it apart, to destabilize it, to expose me. And then, he saw it clearly, laid out like the notes on the legal pad, but this map was accurate. And then he comes back in as the solution, as the elder statesman who restores order. Eddie thinks he's the one who benefits. My father will let him think that right up until the moment he doesn't need him anymore. Vivian looked at him. Your father knows about the boys. The sentence landed, of course. Of course Eddie knew about the boys because Vincent told him, Vincent, who had known about Vivian, who had met Vivian during the 14 months of the marriage, who had been present at the Cobble Hill apartment on exactly 3 occasions, and had evaluated her the way he evaluated every person Dante brought close, with the thorough and ultimately diminishing assessment of a man who considered everyone else to be, at best, a temporary fixture. Vincent had known about Vivian when Dante left her. He had known she was pregnant. The understanding of this came to Dante in a single cold wave, complete and fully formed, and he stood in the front room of the Cobble Hill house and felt it move through him and come out the other side as something that was not anger yet, but was what anger is made from, the pure material of it, before it has a shape. "Did he know?" Vivian said. She was watching his face. "Your father. When you left, did he know I was pregnant?" Dante made himself look at her. "I don't know. But it's possible." He thought about his father sitting across from him in the study in Gravesend a month before he left Vivian, Vincent, 62 at the time, already sick or claiming to be sick, the cardiac episodes that had been apparently considerably overstated. He thought about the conversation, which had been about the organization's future, about succession, about what a leader of the Moretti family could and could not afford to carry. He thought about his father saying, with the measured gravity of a man stating the obvious, "A family is a liability you can't insure against." He thought about Vivian coming home that evening and finding him at the Sicilian tile table, already decided. "It's possible," he said. The silence that followed was the loudest silence he had ever been in. Vivian turned away. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the front steps, at the street. She had her arms wrapped around her own body, which was a thing he had seen her do once before. In a hospital waiting room, a long time ago, when the news from the doctor had not been the news they'd hoped for. The gesture of a person containing something that would otherwise take over. "Vivian. Don't." Soft, absolute. He stopped. She stood at the window for a long moment. When she turned around, her face was controlled in the way that cost the most. Not the absence of feeling, but the active management of it, everything pressed down to a working surface. "If your father knew I was pregnant," she said, "and he convinced you to leave, I don't know that he knew. But if he did," she looked at him, "then you didn't choose to leave on your own terms. He made you do it." A pause. "And I raised 2 children for 9 years, not because you didn't want them, but because your father decided they were inconvenient." Her voice had gone very quiet. The quieter it went, the more weight it carried. "I want you to understand what I'm telling you. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it is what happened, and I need you to hear it." Dante heard it. He stood in the front room and he heard every word and felt each one land in the specific place it was aimed at. And he did not look away from her because she had not looked away from him when she said it. And she deserved, at minimum, the courtesy of being faced. "I'll find out," he said. "How?" "I'm going to see my father." Sal arrived at 6, and Dante told him in the front room with the door closed, concisely and completely. Sal sat through it without moving, without interrupting, without the small reactions that ordinary people produce when they're receiving information that reorganizes everything they thought they knew. When Dante finished, Sal said, "I need a minute." Dante gave him the minute. Sal sat in the chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped and his eyes on the floor. When the minute was up, he looked at Dante. "Vincent," he said, "my brother." He said the words as if testing their weight now that they had a different meaning. "He's been alive this whole time." "Yes." "The funeral. Arranged," Dante said. "We buried an empty casket or someone else's body. I don't know the mechanism yet. I'll find out." Sal's jaw tightened. It was the only visible sign. "And you think he knew about Vivian's pregnancy?" "I think it's probable. He had eyes everywhere in the organization and in my personal life during that period. He was careful about managing my—" He paused. "He was careful about managing me." "Managing you," Sal repeated. The words landed harder than either of them intended. "He always believed sentiment was the one thing that could break me," Dante said. "He was right. He was ahead of me on this by 9 years. He stood up. "I need to go to Naples. Dante, tonight. If I wait for tomorrow's meeting with Eddie, the information goes out to the other families and we're on the back foot. I need to get to my father before Eddie can present it." He picked up his phone from the table. "And I need to find out what he told Eddie,
All of it, and I need to know it from him. Sal looked at him. You're going to fly to Naples tonight and confront Vincent.
Yes. And what happens if Vincent decides that the confrontation is not in his interest? Dante looked at him steadily. Then we find out what my father is actually willing to do. Sal breathed out through his nose. And the boys, Vivian? They stay here. You stay here. Two of Ricci's best on the outside. He paused. No one knows this address except you and Ricci and Luca. It stays that way. You're asking me to babysit the organization while you fly to Naples to yell at your dead father. I'm asking you to keep my sons safe while I resolve the situation that makes them a target, Dante said. The yelling is incidental. Sal looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded, the particular nod of a man who has made his calculation and arrived at a number he doesn't love but can work with. I'll make the call about the plane, he said. Dante went upstairs. He knocked on the bedroom door. A pause, then Vivian opened it. Behind her, the boys were on the bed, Luca reading his book, Marco doing something with the paper and pencil that seemed to have followed him from every surface he'd occupied since the bakery. Both of them looked up when the door opened. I have to go somewhere tonight, Dante said. To Vivian. Not to the boys, but Marco heard it, and his eyes tracked between them with the instinct of a child who has learned that adult conversations have subtext. How long? Vivian said. 24 hours. Maybe less. He paused. Sal is here. The men outside are my best too. No one knows this address. She looked at him. She did not ask where. She had understood enough of what he'd told her downstairs to understand where. Come back, she said. Simply. It was not, he understood, a statement of feeling. It was a practical directive. Come back because you started something and you owe it a completion. Come back because there are two boys in this room who do not yet know your name in the way that matters, and they deserve the chance to know it. I will, he said. He looked past her into the room. At Marco, who had put down his pencil and was watching Dante with those amber-dark eyes that had nothing in them but direct assessment, 9 years old and already capable of a look that landed like a grown man's. At Luca, who had closed his book on his thumb to hold the page and was watching with the quieter, more internal attention that was his particular quality. Dante looked at his sons. He nodded once, not to them, not quite, but in their direction, in the direction of the room they occupied, in the direction of what they were. And then he turned and went downstairs and out into the evening, where Caruso had the car running and the city was making its city sounds all around the house, indifferent and continuous and absolute. He was in the air by 9:15. Over the Atlantic, in the cabin of the plane with the lights low and Caruso asleep 2 rows back and the darkness outside the window complete and featureless, Dante Moretti sat with his hands on the armrests and thought about a man he had mourned and buried and built 13 years of his life on the premise of, and felt something that had no professional utility and no strategic application and could not be managed or suppressed or calibrated. Something that was older than the organization and older than the marriage and older than everything he had constructed himself into being. He felt it, and he did not look away from it. He landed in Naples at 7 in the morning local time with one name written in his phone and an address that Ricci had extracted through 4 hours of compressed, expensive intelligence work. And he walked through the arrivals hall of the airport into Mediterranean morning light and thought about 2 boys asleep in Cobble Hill, and about a woman who had raised them alone for 9 years, based on a decision that may not, in the end, have been his decision at all, and about a father who had taught him that a man without family was a man without vulnerability, and who had apparently believed that deeply enough to spend 11 years proving it from the other side. He got in the car that was waiting and said the address, and as the car moved through Naples toward the neighborhood where his father had been living under a different name for 11 years, Dante's phone lit up with a message from Ricci that said only, Eddie moved up the meeting. He's calling the other families for tonight. He's not waiting for your 48 hours. Dante looked at the message. He looked at the Naples streets sliding past the window, old buildings, morning light cutting between them, the ordinary city going about its ordinary morning with no knowledge of what was happening in its streets. He typed back, stall him. Ricci's reply came in 10 seconds. How? Dante looked out the window. The car turned onto a narrower street. The buildings pressed closer on both sides. Somewhere ahead, in a neighborhood called Posillipo, with a view of the water and a life built on the ruins of a faked death, a 74-year-old man was having his morning coffee and did not yet know that his son had crossed an ocean overnight. He typed, "However you have to. I need 4 hours." He put the phone in his pocket. The car stopped in front of a building with white painted walls and green shutters and a small potted tree by the front door, and Dante got out and stood on the pavement in the morning light and looked at the building where his father had been living while Dante buried him and grieved him in the only way Dante Moretti was capable of grieving anything, privately, efficiently, and completely alone. And he walked to the front door and knocked. The man who opened it was older than Dante remembered, which was inevitable given the 11 years, but was still, unmistakably, completely, his father. The same square jaw, the same dark eyes that had gone more gray at the rim with age, the same quality of absolute stillness in a doorway that Dante had apparently inherited because he recognized it in himself every time he looked in a mirror. Vincent Moretti looked at his son, and his face did not change at all. "You move fast," he said, in Italian, which they had always spoken between themselves. "Did you know she was pregnant?" Dante said. In English, deliberately. His father looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man deciding which version of the truth serves him best, running the calculation with the speed and precision of someone who had been running those calculations his entire life. And in that pause, in the half-second of calculation that Dante could read, because he had learned to read it at this man's knee and had used it himself 10,000 times since, he had his answer before his father said a single word. Vincent Moretti stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, just a tactical retreat, creating space between himself and his son, the way a man creates space when he is recalculating, when the variable he prepared for has arrived at a different temperature than expected. He moved back into the apartment and Dante followed him in and closed the door, and the two of them stood in a living room that smelled of espresso and old wood, and the particular quality of a life carefully constructed to look ordinary. The apartment was good, not lavish. Vincent had never been lavish, had always understood that lavish attracted attention, and attention was the enemy of longevity. But good. Bookshelves, a desk with papers on it, a window that looked out over Posillipo and the water beyond it, the light coming in clean and Mediterranean and indifferent to what was about to happen in the room. "Sit down," Vincent said. "I'll stand," Dante said. Vincent looked at him. He was 74 and the years showed in the way years show on men who have spent them under pressure. The face more deeply lined, the hair gone fully white, the hands a little less steady than they once were when he set his espresso cup on the table beside his chair. But the eyes were the same, the specific amber dark of them, the same color that Dante saw in his own mirror and that he had seen in the faces of two boys in a bakery on Carver Street was unchanged. Time had done nothing to that particular quality of assessment, that flat and comprehensive reading of a room. "You know why I'm here," Dante said. "You asked me a question at the door," Vincent said. "I assumed you didn't fly to Naples overnight because you missed me." "Answer it." Vincent sat down in the chair by the window. He picked up the espresso cup and held it in both hands the way old men hold warm things, for the warmth rather than the coffee. He looked at his son standing in the middle of the room. "Yes," he said, "I knew." The word was very small for what it contained. Dante stood with it for 3 full seconds. He had known. He had known from the pause in the doorway, had read it in the calculation on his father's face, but knowing and hearing are different, and the hearing of it moved through him in a way the knowing hadn't. "When?" he said, "before you left her." "She had a doctor's appointment. I had someone at the practice." A pause. 6 weeks along. Both of them. "You knew it was twins." "Yes." Dante looked at his father. He looked at him the way you look at something you have built your entire understanding of a world on when the understanding fails. "And then you sat across from me in Gravesend and told me that a family was a liability." "It is a liability." "You told me to leave her." "I told you what the organization required," Vincent said. The distinction was careful and deliberate,
and completely accurate and completely dishonest, and both of them knew it. You made your own decision. On information you controlled. I gave you my assessment. What you did with it. Don't! Dante's voice came out harder than he intended, harder than he had planned for this conversation to go. But the planning was insufficient for the reality of standing in a room in Naples and looking at a man he had mourned and hearing him explain, with the same measured precision that had shaped every conversation of Dante's childhood, why he had arranged for his son to abandon his pregnant wife. Don't give me the assessment framing. You knew what I would do. You built me. You know exactly what I do with that kind of assessment. Vincent was quiet for a moment. The espresso cup rested on his knee. Children would have made you soft, he said, finally, simply. As if this were a fact he was presenting to a room of adults who could evaluate it on its merits. You had the capacity to run the organization better than I ever did. I had seen it for years. But you had one weakness. You attached. When you loved something, you protected it above everything else. That quality, in a man running this organization, made me human, Dante said. Made you exploitable, Vincent said, which is what is happening right now. You flew to Naples overnight and left your operation exposed because of 2 children you have known for 3 weeks. He paused. The assessment was calm. I was not wrong about the liability. You were wrong about everything else, Dante said. Vincent looked at him. You were wrong about what it cost, Dante said. You calculated what children would cost me in terms of operational effectiveness. You didn't calculate what it cost her, what it cost them. His voice was level, but it was the level of something held, not the level of something calm. 9 years, Papa. She had them alone. No money, no insurance, 41 days in the NICU. She moved 6 times, 11 jobs. She's been paying off their birth for 9 years because she had no coverage when they came early, because she was alone, because I left her based on an assessment you gave me while you already knew she was carrying my sons. The room was very quiet. Outside, Naples went about its morning, a boat somewhere on the water, the sound of a scooter on the street below. And then you faked your death, Dante said. And I ran the organization for 13 years on the premise that I was carrying on your work, that I owed you that it was the least I could do for a dead man. He stopped. You weren't dead. You were watching. I was protecting myself, Vincent said. The Calabrian situation in 2013. There were men who wanted me dead. The exit was necessary. The exit was convenient, Dante said. It handed me the organization and removed you from any accountability for what you'd built and what it cost. Clean. Vincent looked at him for a long time. And the long look was something Dante had very rarely seen in his father's face. Not guilt, because Vincent Moretti's architecture did not have a room for guilt, but something adjacent to it. The recognition that a calculation had been presented to another intelligence and found incomplete. What do you want from me? Vincent said. I want you to call Eddie Falcone, Dante said. Right now. I want you to tell him the arrangement is over, that you're withdrawing whatever information you've provided, and that he has no backing from the Moretti name in any form. He paused. And then I want you to stay in Naples and not contact anyone in the organization again. Vincent looked at him. And if I don't, then I spend the next 6 months dismantling every arrangement you made in Naples, your cover, your accounts, your contacts, until there's nothing left of the life you built here. And I release your name and your location to every family that has a grievance with the Moretti organization from the last 30 years. He said it without heat. It was not a threat in the emotional sense. It was an assessment. He had learned that from somewhere. You know I can do that. You'd burn your own father. You burned me first, Dante said, and you burned 2 children who didn't ask to be in this. Silence. Vincent set the espresso cup on the table. He looked out the window at the water. The light on it was clean and flat and very blue. He moved up the meeting, Dante said. Eddie, he's calling the other families for tonight, which means I have approximately... He checked his phone. A message from Ricci. 3 hours before he presents everything you gave him to a room full of people who will use it. Then you don't have time to negotiate with me, Vincent said. No, Dante said. I don't.
He pulled out a phone, not his primary phone, a second one that Ricci had prepared, and set it on the table in front of his father. He had already loaded it with Eddie Falcone's number. "Make the call," he said. Vincent looked at the phone. He looked at his son. The calculation moved through his eyes the way it always moved, thorough and fast and comprehensive, weighing angles and outcomes and the specific weight of what this particular son was capable of when he had decided something. He picked up the phone. Awesome. Dante was back in the car and moving toward the airport before the call was finished, because he had heard the first 30 seconds of it and knew from his father's tone, the particular tone of a man delivering a message he has decided to deliver, that it would be completed. He had known, standing in that apartment in Posillipo, that Vincent would make the call not out of guilt or love or any quality that required warmth, but out of the same cold calculation that had governed everything else, because Dante had presented the alternatives accurately, and Vincent was above all things a man who understood accurate assessments. He called Ricci from the car. "The call is coming from my father," he said. "When it lands, I need you to verify it directly with Eddie's people. Don't take it on faith, confirm that Eddie has actually received it and confirm his reaction. And if Eddie ignores it, he won't. He needs my father's backing to make this credible. Without Vincent, what Eddie has is a collection of organizational intelligence that he can't deploy without exposing his source, and no source means no leverage." He paused. "But verify anyway. What's your ETA?" 7 hours. "I'll be back by 8 tonight." He paused. "What's the situation at the house?" "Quiet," Ricci said. "Sal's been there all day. Boys went to the garden this afternoon, apparently. Sal taught one of them to play cards." Something moved in Dante's chest, brief and involuntary. "Which one?" "The quiet one, Luca." He closed his eyes for 1 second. "Keep me updated." He flew back across the Atlantic with his phone on his knee and the plane making its steady progress through the dark, and he did not sleep, could not sleep, because beneath the operational necessity of the next 8 hours was the thing his father had said. You attached. When you loved something, you protected it above everything else. And the particular weight of the word had, used in the past tense about 2 boys he had known for 3 weeks and a woman he had not spoken to in 9 years. His phone lit up at 30,000 feet over the ocean, somehow catching a signal, with a message from Ricci that said, "Eddie received the call. He's angry. He's reaching out to the other families to salvage the meeting." And then, 4 minutes later, he's not getting traction. Without Vincent, the play doesn't hold. He's isolated. And then, 20 minutes after that, a message that said only, "Dante, call me." He called. "Eddie made a move," Ricci said. The controlled urgency was back in his voice, the voice of bad news that couldn't wait. "Not through the families. He went direct." Dante's hand tightened on the phone. "What does direct mean?" he said. "He sent 2 men to the house." A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Carver Street." Not the Cobble Hill address. He didn't have the Cobble Hill address. He went to her building. Dante was already standing in the aisle of the plane, which was irrational because there was nowhere to go. Nowhere at all. 30,000 feet over an ocean. He stood in the aisle anyway. "The boys were not there," Ricci said quickly. "Vivian was not there. Everyone is at the Cobble Hill address. They've been there since last night. The Carver Street building was empty." Dante's lungs started working again. "But Dante." Another pause. "He knows we moved them somewhere. He's looking. He's put 3 crews on it. He's pulling every contact he has to find the address." A pause. "He's past leverage now. This is just damage." A man with nothing to lose was more dangerous than a man with something. Dante knew this. He had known it for 20 years. He had seen it in a dozen rooms, watched men transition from strategic to desperate, and he knew that the transition produced the kind of action that didn't calculate consequence because the man taking it had decided there was no consequence worth calculating for. Eddie Falcone had been outmaneuvered. His backing was gone. His play was collapsed. His credibility with the other families was damaged. He was 28 years old and he had nothing left to do with his anger except aim it. "Lock down the Cobble Hill address," Dante said. "Everything we have. Call Sal and tell him to not let anyone leave the house. And Ricci." He gripped the phone. "Find Eddie Falcone. We're looking."
Find him before he finds that address. He sat back down. The plane moved through the dark above the ocean, and he sat with his hands flat on the armrests and felt, for the first time in his professional life, the specific quality of helplessness, not tactical helplessness, which was a problem to be solved, but the helplessness of being too far away from the people who needed him to be present and not being able to close the distance fast enough. He landed at JFK at 8:14 in the evening. He had his phone to his ear before the wheels stopped moving. "Status," he said. Eddie's crew found a partial lead on the neighborhood, Ricci said. Not the address, but the area. They're running a grid. How long before they narrow it? Hour, maybe two. An hour.
2 hours. The Cobble Hill address was good, but it was not infinitely good. It was a residential block. Accessible, with the kind of street layout that 3 careful men could walk systematically and check every building in under 90 minutes. "I'm on the ground," Dante said. "Where's Eddie?" "We have him on a cell ping. He's in Red Hook. Moving." "Toward Cobble Hill." "Generally, yes." He was through the terminal and into the car in 8 minutes. Caruso had the engine running. Dante got in and said, "Cobble Hill as fast as it goes," and Caruso pulled out without a word. Red Hook to Cobble Hill was 8 minutes in no traffic. At 9 in the evening on a Thursday, it was 12. From JFK, it was 25, and that was moving. He called Sal. "I know," Sal said, answering before the first ring completed. "Ricci called. We're locked down." "The boys." "In the back bedroom. Vivian is with them. She knows there's a situation. I didn't give her specifics." "Give her specifics," Dante said. "She needs to know what's happening." "Dante, she has the right to know." His voice came out harder than he intended. "Tell her." He heard Sal moving through the house, heard a door, heard Vivian's voice, a question, sharp and immediate, the voice of someone who has been sitting with uncertainty for hours and has decided to be done with uncertainty. Then Sal's voice, low, relaying, then silence, then Vivian. How far out is Dante? He could hear her through the phone. He said, 20 minutes, loud enough for Sal to hear and relay. A pause. Her voice, not to him. Okay. Just that. Okay. The same words she'd said in the front room of that house when he told her what his father had done. Not forgiveness, not welcome, just the word, provisionally. A door an inch open. He put the phone down and looked out the window at the Brooklyn night and counted blocks. Eddie's crew found the street at 9:22. Ricci's man called it in. One of the 3 cars running the grid had turned onto the Cobble Hill block and slowed, which meant they'd found something. A car they recognized. A face from earlier surveillance, some thread that pulled the right direction. Dante was 6 minutes out. He called it to Ricci. Move on them now. I don't want them on that block. We've got 1 car in position. Move with 1 car. Don't wait for me. The thing about protective operations was the timing of intervention. Too early, and you were working on insufficient information. Too late, and the thing you were protecting had already been reached. Dante had run enough of them to know that the window was narrow and that the preference was always for early, always for before, because after was not a window, it was a consequence. He heard it through the phone when Ricci's car made contact. Not the specifics, just the quality of controlled noise that meant bodies moving, orders given, a situation being actively managed. He was 4 minutes out. Then Ricci's voice. We've got 3 of them. Eddie's not in this car. Where is Eddie? A pause. The pause was 3 seconds, which was 3 seconds too long. He split from the group, Ricci said. He's on foot. We're looking. On foot meant he had expected the car to be stopped. On foot meant he had planned for the grid to be intercepted and had peeled off in advance. On foot meant Eddie Falcone, 28 years old with nothing left to leverage, was somewhere on the streets of Cobble Hill right now with no car to trace and no cell phone pinging because he had apparently left the phone in the car. Dante was 2 minutes out. Get everyone on that block, he said. We're already... Everyone, Ricci? He put the phone down. He looked at the back of Caruso's head and said, drive through it. Don't stop. And Caruso understood what that meant and took the next 2 turns with the particular controlled speed of a man who has done this before and knows that controlled is faster than fast. They came around the corner onto the block, and Dante was scanning before the car finished the turn. The parked cars, the stoops, the sidewalk, the angles. And he saw the figure moving on the far side of the street, moving fast and purposeful toward the brownstone with the oxidized chairs in the back garden, and he said, "Stop," and was out of the car before it fully stopped. He crossed the street at a run. Eddie heard him, heard the footsteps, or saw the movement in the periphery, and turned, and in the half-second of recognition that crossed his face was the full and complete picture. The outmaneuvered play, the failed meeting, the father who had pulled his backing, and now the man himself coming across the street at speed, and whatever Eddie had been planning to do in the next 30 seconds was not going to happen. But Eddie had not come empty-handed. The gun was out and pointed in the time it took Dante to cover 20 feet, and Dante pulled up because a pulled gun in a residential street at 9 in the evening was a different calculation than everything that had come before it, was a line that once crossed could not be uncrossed, and he stopped 6 feet from Eddie Falcone and looked at the gun and then looked at the face of the man holding it. The face was young. That was the thing that landed. It was the face of a young man who had built an entire play over 3 months and watched it come apart in a single day, and who was standing in a street with a gun because the gun was the only remaining piece of leverage, which meant it was not leverage at all. "Eddie," Dante said, level, the way he said everything. "Shut up." Eddie's hand was steady. To his credit. "You shut it down. You called him. You flew there and you made him call it off." The steadiness in the hand was effort. You could see the effort in the tendons of the wrist. "That was my play, Moretti. I built that for 3 months." "I know. You don't get to just—" He stopped. Something in his face compressed. "Where are they?" "Not here," Dante said. "I know they're in this building. We tracked—" "They're not in this building," Dante said, which was a lie delivered with the precise calm of 13 years of rooms where lies and truths had to be indistinguishable. "They've been moved. There's no one in this building but my men." The gun didn't waver, but something in Eddie's eyes did. The calculation running, checking whether it was possible, whether the address could have been wrong, whether— "Eddie," Dante kept his voice even and his hands visible and his feet where they were. "Look at what you're doing. Look at where you are. You're standing in a residential street in Cobble Hill with a gun pointed at me, and there are 4 of my men within shouting distance." He paused. "This doesn't end the way you want it to end." "It doesn't have to end any particular way," Eddie said. "We can still negotiate." "No," Dante said. "We can't. You're willing to go to war over this." "I'm willing to do whatever is necessary." He said it simply, without emphasis, which was more effective than emphasis. "You made this about my children. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was thinking that removing Vincent's backing made you safe. It doesn't. What you built over 3 months, I can dismantle over 3 days, Eddie, and we both know that." He looked at the young man's face. "Put the gun down." The street was quiet, the specific quiet of a city block at night when something has removed the ambient sound, when bodies have gone still and traffic has found other routes, and the neighborhood holds its breath without knowing why. Eddie's hand was still steady, but his eyes had moved once, to the left, checking, which meant he was looking for an exit and didn't like what he was finding. "My father was wrong about a lot of things," Dante said, "but he was right about one. This organization has run for 30 years on the premise that certain lines don't get crossed. You're standing on one of them right now." He paused. "Children don't get touched. That's not my rule. That's older than me and older than my father." He looked at Eddie steadily. "You went to Carver Street tonight. You sent men to a building where my sons might have been." "They weren't there." "They might have been," Dante said. "And you sent men anyway." He felt something change in the quality of his stillness. Not anger, past anger. Something that was what anger becomes when anger runs out of room. "So no, we're not negotiating. And when I get this gun out of my face, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation." The door of the brownstone opened. It opened and Vivian stepped out onto the stoop. Dante's entire body went cold. She had heard enough. A voice in the street, something that brought her to the front of the house against every instruction Sal had given her. And she was standing on the stoop of the brownstone with the light behind her, and a clear sight line to the man with the gun and no cover whatsoever. And for one complete second, the entire night contracted to that fact and nothing else. Eddie's eyes moved to her. In that second, the second of Eddie's attention moving, Dante moved. Not toward the gun, toward Eddie's body, inside the arm, the way you moved inside a line of fire when the alternative was worse than the risk, dropping his shoulder and driving into Eddie's midsection with the full weight and velocity of a man who has decided that the only remaining variable he could control was his own body and where he put it. The gun went off. The sound was enormous in the quiet street. It went into the air, up and left, away from the stoop, away from Vivian, because Dante had his hand on Eddie's wrist before the trigger was pulled and had angled it, had felt the bone of the wrist under his fingers and pushed, and the round went somewhere into the dark above the parked cars, and the street absorbed the sound, and then the quiet came back. Dante had Eddie on the ground, on the pavement with his face against the concrete and Dante's knee in the center of his back, and the gun skittering away under a parked car, and Eddie was making sounds that were not words, just the sounds of a man with his air compressed and his face on cold pavement and nothing left in the play. Ricci's men came from both ends of the block at a run. Dante looked up at the stoop. Vivian was standing exactly where she'd been when the door opened, one hand on the door frame and her face white in the way faces go white when adrenaline has done something to the blood. She was looking at him. Her eyes went from his face to Eddie on the ground and back. Behind her, at the top of the stairs inside the house, Dante could see Marco. He was standing in the hallway in his pajamas, the same pajamas from 2 nights ago, and he was looking out through the open door at his father, kneeling on the pavement with his knee in the back of a man Marco didn't know, in a street at night, and his face was doing something that Dante had no word for, and that was the worst thing that had happened in a night full of terrible things, because his son was 9 years old and was standing in a doorway looking at who his father was. Vivian turned and saw Marco. She moved to him immediately, blocking the sight line, turning him back into the hallway with both hands gentle on his shoulders. Ricci's men pulled Eddie up. Dante stood. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be, not from exertion, from the specific aftermath of the thing that had almost happened, the thing that had been 2 seconds from a different outcome. He stood on the cobble hill pavement and felt his own heartbeat in his hands. His phone rang. He looked at it. It was a number he recognized as one of the captain's. Then another one. 3 of them in the space of 40 seconds. A gunshot in a residential street at 9 in the evening had consequences. There would be police. There would be reports. And 3 captains calling simultaneously meant word had moved faster than the shot. Meant the captains had been watching and waiting for exactly this kind of crack in the surface of the Moretti operation, and were now calling to confirm that the crack was real. He let the calls go to voicemail. He went up the stoop and into the house. Vivian was in the hallway with Marco. She had her arms around him from behind, her chin at the top of his head, and Marco was not crying. He was not the kind of child who cried. Dante had already understood this about him, but he was not moving either, which was its own thing. He was standing inside his mother's arms and looking at the floor with the particular focused stillness of a child processing something that is larger than a child's frame is built to contain. Dante crouched down in front of him. Marco looked up. Those eyes, amber dark and direct and completely his own, looked at Dante from a distance of about 2 feet. "Are you hurt?" Marco said. "Not are you okay. Are you hurt?" "No," Dante said. Marco looked at him for another second. Then he said, with the compressed gravity of a 9-year-old delivering a verdict, "You should have stayed inside." The thing that happened in Dante's chest at his son, in pajamas, in a hallway, in Cobble Hill, offering this precise and accurate and devastating assessment, was not something he could have prepared for, and was not something he could hold his face entirely still against, and he didn't try. "You're right," he said. "I should have." Marco looked at him for one more second. Then he turned inside his mother's arms,
and pressed his face into her shoulder in the way of a child who has decided that the assessment has been delivered and what comes next is his mother's department. Vivian looked at Dante over the top of Marco's head. Her face said, "We are not done." It said, "There's a conversation coming that you are not going to be able to manage with your calibrated calm." It said, "My son just watched something in a street and I am going to have to explain it, and I do not yet know how." It also said, underneath all of that, in the place where her face showed the things she had decided to let show, "Thank you for the gun going into the air instead of the stoop." Sal appeared from the back of the house. He took one look at the hallway and said, "Luca's still in the back room. He didn't come out." Dante stood up. "I need to make some calls." "You need to make several," Sal said. "The captain's—" "I know." He paused. He looked at the hallway, at Vivian and Marco, at the ordinary domestic architecture of a house at night with 2 children in it. "Give me 10 minutes. He went into the front room and sat in the chair he'd been sitting in 2 nights ago when the phone had rung with Angela Rice's voice and the thing under the thing had begun to show itself. He sat in the same chair and looked at the same window and listened to the house around him. Vivian's voice, low and steady, coming from the hallway. The sound of Marco's feet on the stairs going back up. Somewhere in the back of the house, Sal on his phone, talking quietly to someone in the organization. The captains were calling because the organization had sustained a public incident, a gunshot on a residential street, a visible confrontation. The kind of thing that produced consequences in multiple directions: law enforcement, rival families, the internal politics of an organization that ran on the premise of controlled and invisible operations. They were calling because they wanted to know if Dante Moretti was still in control. He sat with that for the 10 minutes he had given himself. Then he picked up his phone and called the senior captain, a man named Borelli, who had been with the organization for 22 years, and who was the one whose opinion mattered most among the rest. "Borelli," he said when the call connected. "Dante." A pause. "We heard there was a situation." "There was," Dante said. "It's been handled. The Falcone kid is no longer a concern. His operation has been dismantled and his backing has been withdrawn." He paused. "But there are things we need to talk about, not on the phone. Tomorrow, the Gravesend house, 9 in the morning. All the captains?" "All of them." He paused. "There are things about the organization's current situation that you need to hear from me directly. There are going to be changes." A silence on the line. Borelli processing. "What kind of changes?" he said. "The kind we talk about tomorrow," Dante said. 9 o'clock. He hung up. He sat in the front room and felt the house around him, the specific weight of it, the specific quality of a place where people he was responsible for were sleeping or trying to sleep. He thought about Marco's face in the doorway. He thought about his father in Naples saying you attached. When you loved something, you protected it above everything else. He thought about a man with a gun in a street and the 2 seconds that had been between one outcome and another, and the fact that those 2 seconds had contained everything: his sons, Vivian on the stoop, the next 30 years of something he had only begun to understand the shape of, and that the margin had been exactly that thin. He stood up and walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up at the darkened second floor where the bedroom doors were closed. He thought about Borelli saying what kind of changes, and about the 9 captains who were going to sit in the Gravesend house tomorrow morning and look at him across the table and wait for him to tell them what the Moretti organization was going to look like going forward. He thought about what it would cost. He had spent the last 4 days discovering what things cost. The 9 years, the medical debt, the 6 moves, the 11 jobs, the specific cost of a child drawing cities on paper bags because there was no money for a sketchbook. He knew how to calculate cost. He had always known how to calculate cost. He walked upstairs. He stopped outside the bedroom door. From inside he could hear, barely, the sound of 2 boys breathing in sleep. Marco in the depth of it already, with the absolute commitment to unconsciousness that exhausted children achieve, and Luca quieter, slower, possibly not yet asleep. He put one hand flat on the door, the way he had put his hand flat on the cold window in the Gravesend house the night he first read the files,
and held it there. Then he heard it. Not from the bedroom. From the end of the hall, where Vivian had been standing when he came upstairs. Her voice, quiet and precise, speaking to someone on her phone, and one word that cut through the hallway dark and landed in his chest like something thrown. "Lawyer," she said, and then, "Tomorrow morning before 9 if you can." He took his hand off the door. He stood in the hallway at the top of the stairs and understood what she was doing, and understood why she was doing it, and understood that after everything that had happened tonight, the gun, the street, Marco in the doorway, she was making the call that any mother would make. The call that said, "I need to know what my rights are. I need to know what I can control. I need to know how to protect my sons from a world I didn't choose and cannot leave because the man who brought it to my door is also their father." He went back downstairs. He sat in the front room. He did not sleep. At 4 in the morning, his phone lit up with a message from Ricci. Eddie Falcone is talking to the DA's office. He's offering everything he has on the Moretti organization in exchange for a deal. Dante read the message. He read it twice. He looked at the dark window of the front room and felt the final piece of the architecture settle into place with the specific weight of something that has been held up for a long time by the wrong supports and has finally, inevitably, found the floor. Eddie Falcone talking to the DA meant that whatever Dante said tomorrow morning to the 9 captains in the Gravesend house was going to happen against a backdrop of federal interest in the Moretti organization, which changed the shape of every option on the table, which meant the meeting tomorrow was not going to be the meeting he had planned to have, was going to be something more fundamental than a conversation about changes, was going to be the conversation that determined whether there was an organization left to change at all. He sat in the chair in the front room and felt the weight of it, and felt beneath the weight the thing his father had said. You attached. When you loved something, you protected it above everything else. And felt beneath that the sound of Vivian's voice in the hallway saying lawyer and tomorrow morning, and understood with the clarity that comes only at 4 in the morning after a night like this one, that the choice he was facing was not the choice he had thought he was facing 3 weeks ago when he walked into a bakery on Carver Street and saw 2 boys with his eyes. It was simpler than that. It was the simplest choice there was. He picked up his phone and called Reyes. "I need to start moving money," he said when Reyes answered, groggy and then immediately alert in the way of men who have learned that calls at 4 in the morning are the calls that matter. Not hiding it, moving it, legitimate channels. I want to know what it takes to establish a foundation. Legal, auditable, clean. He paused. And I need the organization's lawyers in the Gravesend house tomorrow at 9. All of them. Reyes was quiet for a moment. "Dante," he said carefully, "are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" Dante looked at the dark window. "Get them there at 9, he said. He put the phone down. Upstairs, in a room he could not see from where he was sitting, 2 boys were sleeping, one of them with the complete abandon of the deeply unconscious, one of them perhaps beginning to surface toward morning, perhaps lying in the dark with his eyes open the way quiet children do, processing the weight of a night that had been too large for a 9-year-old to carry alone. And Dante Moretti sat in the chair below them and understood, finally and completely and without the buffer of professional distance, that the empire he had spent 13 years building was going to have to come apart, and that the only question left was whether he had the courage to be the one who took it apart, or whether he was going to wait for the federal government to do it for him and lose everything in the process, including the only thing that had ever actually mattered, which he had not known mattered until 3 weeks ago. When a bell above a bakery door rang, and 2 small boys looked up with his eyes. The 9 captains arrived at the Gravesend house between 8:40 and 9, and each of them, as they came through the door, registered the presence of the lawyers. 4 of them, from 2 different firms, with laptops and document cases, with the particular stillness of men who have learned that certain arrangements of furniture and personnel in a room tell you more than anything said in it. Borelli came in last. He was 61, broad through the chest, with the face of someone who had seen enough that his face had stopped volunteering reactions to new information. He looked at the lawyers. He looked at Dante standing at the head of the table. He sat down without a word. Dante waited until they were all seated. "I'm going to tell you what's happening," he said, "and then I'm going to tell you what comes next. You won't like the second part." That's not something I can fix. He told them about Eddie Falcone, about Vincent, about the DA's office. He told it straight, no softening, no framing designed to manage their reaction. He had decided, somewhere in the 4 a.m. dark, that the last performance he was going to give in this room was the performance of a man who still needed to manage how other people processed his decisions. He was done with that particular work. When he finished, there was silence. The particular silence of 9 men recalibrating. Borelli said, "How much does Eddie have?" "Enough to produce indictments," Dante said. "The financial architecture, the dock arrangements, the Sunset Park operation, parts of the supply chain. He got it from my father over 4 months. My father built the original version of most of it, so what he gave Eddie is structurally accurate even where it's outdated." "Can we discredit him?" said Carmine, who ran the Brooklyn operation and who was, of the 9, the most interested in operational survival over everything else. "No," Dante said. "Not in a way that holds." "Then we move things," Carmine said. "We've done it before. Restructure, relocate, let the indictments chase things that aren't there anymore." "That's an option," Dante said. "It's not the option I'm taking." The room changed temperature. Small shift, barely visible, but 9 men who had spent their lives reading rooms felt it simultaneously. "I'm cooperating with the investigation," Dante said. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. It was the stillness of a room that has received something too large for an immediate reaction. Then Borelli said, "Say that again." "I'm cooperating," Dante said. "Controlled cooperation, negotiated through the lawyers, with parameters that protect individuals not directly implicated in the federal case. I'm not giving names gratuitously. I'm giving the financial architecture, the operational structure, the mechanisms. I'm giving what they can build without me anyway from what Eddie's already provided. But I'm giving it in a form I control, on a timeline I control, with terms that give everyone in this room the maximum possible protection that's available." Carmine stood up. "Sit down, Carmine," Borelli said. He said it without volume or emphasis. Carmine sat. "You're dismantling it," Borelli said to Dante. Not a question. A man arriving at the correct reading of information and stating it. "Yes, Alcum," Dante said. "Why?" Borelli said. It was the question Dante had prepared for, had turned over during the sleepless night, had arrived at an answer to that was true, and that he was going to deliver without the professional framing that would make it easier for the room to hear. "Because I have 2 sons," he said, "and I spent the last 4 days understanding what it costs when the life you chose is the life that shapes them." He looked at the table, at the 9 men around it, at the faces of men he had worked alongside, some of them for more than a decade. Men who had done difficult things for the organization and for him personally, and who deserved more than they were getting from this morning. "What I'm offering through the lawyers is the best outcome available, not good. Available." He paused. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you what's happening so you can make your own decisions with accurate information." Borelli looked at him for a long time. The look of a man taking a final measurement of someone he has spent years measuring. "Your father," Borelli said, "he taught me this business. Did you know that? 1987, I was 22 years old. Vincent Moretti sat across from me and explained how this organization worked and why it worked and what it required." He paused. "I thought you were him for a long time. The same quality. The same—" He stopped. "You're not him." "No," Dante said. "I'm not." Borelli nodded. Once, slowly, the nod of a man who has completed a calculation and accepted the result. "Get me in front of your lawyers," he said. "I want to understand the parameters." One by one, in the following 20 minutes, 7 of the remaining 8 captains indicated the same. Carmine was last. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his jaw set, and looked at Dante with the specific expression of a man who has built his life on one set of premises and is being asked to rebuild it on another, which is a thing that some men simply cannot do. "I need time," Carmine said. "You have until Friday," Dante said. "After that, the lawyers proceed with or without your cooperation. The terms are better with it." Carmine stood up and left the room without another word. Dante did not try to stop him.
Some things could not be fixed, and trying to fix them was its own kind of dishonesty. The lawyers opened their laptops.
The cooperation agreement took 11 days to negotiate. During those 11 days, Dante moved between the Cobble Hill house and the offices of 2 law firms and a series of meetings with federal investigators who were professional and thorough and who treated him with the particular neutrality of people who have decided to receive what is being offered and evaluate it without performing either gratitude or hostility. It was, Dante found, a negotiation like any other, run on the same principles: clarity of objective, accurate assessment of leverage, patience with process. The skills transferred. He found some comfort in that. Vivian stayed at the Cobble Hill house with the boys through the first week, and then, after the street was confirmed clear and Eddie Falcone was in federal custody, and the immediate threat was resolved, she moved them back to Carver Street. She did this without discussing it with Dante, which was her right. And she did it with the same organized efficiency she brought to everything, packing the canvas duffel and zipping the boys' backpacks and walking out of the borrowed house on a Tuesday morning while Dante was at the lawyer's office. He came back to find the house empty in the specific way that houses go empty when people who are living in them leave. Not just absent, but vacated, the quality of the air different, the rooms returning to the impersonal stillness they'd had before. He stood in the kitchen where he'd made eggs and looked at the table where Marco had arranged crackers in a city grid, and he stood there for a while. Then he called Vivian. "I know," she said, answering before he could speak. "I should have told you we were going." "You didn't have to tell me," he said. "It's your decision." A pause. "The lawyer I called," she said. "I want you to know why." "I know why." "Let me say it." Her voice was careful, not hostile. Careful in the way of someone who is going to say something they've been organizing for days. I needed to understand what my options were, what the boys' options were. If you were going to be in their lives in any formal sense, I needed to understand what that meant legally, what I could control, what I couldn't. A pause. It wasn't a declaration of war. "I know," he said. "Dante." Another pause. "What you're doing, the cooperation, the dismantling, I've been following it through what Sal tells me, which is probably not everything, but enough." She stopped. "Is it real?" He looked at the empty kitchen. "Yes," he said. "Not a strategy." "Not a strategy," he said. "There are no more strategies. I ran out of room for strategies somewhere around 4 a.m. 10 days ago." A silence on the line. The kind of silence that has texture, that is not empty, but full of things being weighed. "Okay," she said. For the 3rd time in 2 weeks, that word. But this time the quality of it was different. Not a door an inch open, a door open wider than an inch. Not all the way. He did not expect all the way. Would not have trusted all the way. Would have known it was not real if she'd offered it that easily. But wider. "Can I come to Carver Street?" he said. "Saturday," she said. "I'll tell the boys you're coming. We'll see how that goes." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "It's for them. You understand that." "I understand that." She hung up. He stood in the empty kitchen a while longer. Then he locked the house and went back to the lawyers. Saturday was cold. The specific cold of late autumn in New York that comes down between the buildings and doesn't lift. He walked from where he parked, 3 blocks. He had not wanted to pull up in the Escalade, had taken a car that was not a statement, and stood outside the building on Carver Street with the fire escape that still needed painting and the buzzer panel where Ashcroft V was still written in pencil, and he pressed the button. The buzzer sounded immediately. She'd been watching for him. He went up. The apartment door was open. He knocked anyway, and Vivian called from somewhere inside, "Come in!" And he went in. It was the first time he had been inside her apartment. In all the weeks since the bakery, all the conversations and crises and the night on the stoop with a gun in the street, he had never been inside. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. Small, genuinely small. The front room with its 1 couch and the bookshelves built from boards and brackets.
and the window that looked out onto the side street, the kitchen visible through a doorway, the 2-bedroom doors at the back. The walls were covered in Marco's drawings, not framed, not matted, taped up, pinned up, overlapping in places, cities and buildings and bridges, and a few things that were more abstract, darker, that might have been what a 9-year-old imagined as the inside of something rather than the outside. The drawings covered most of 2 walls and part of a third, and they were, collectively, the most fully inhabited room Dante had ever stood in. The walls of the Gravesend house were hung with nothing. The walls of every place he had spent his adult life were clean and considered and empty of anything that revealed what happened in the interior of the person living there. These walls were the interior of a child. He was still looking at them when Marco appeared in the doorway to the back. He was dressed normally. Jeans, a sweatshirt, the scuffed sneakers. He had his arms at his sides, and his expression was the one Dante had learned to read as Marco's default mode of new situation assessment. Watchful, calibrating, not hostile but not open, waiting for enough information to update the assessment. "You came," Marco said. "I said I would," Dante said. "You said you'd come back from wherever you went," Marco said. "This is different." The precision of this landed. Dante looked at his son and felt, as he had been feeling for weeks in varying intensities, the specific weight of 9 years of absence compressed into a child's face. The gap of it, all the context he did not have, all the mornings and dinners and fevers and first days that had composed this person standing in a doorway without him. "You're right," Dante said. "It's different." Marco came into the room. He looked at the walls the way you look at something you made when someone else is looking at it, with the particular self-awareness of an artist confronted with their own work in front of an audience. "Do you like them?" he said. "Casual. Not casual." "They're remarkable," Dante said. Marco's expression shifted. He filed it. "Mom said you grew up in Gravesend." "Yes." "Is it nice there?" "Parts of it." He paused. "There's a good park, near the water." Marco considered this. "We've never been." "I know," Dante said. A silence. The particular silence of 2 people who are related in a way that neither of them has yet found the vocabulary for, standing in a room full of drawings. Luca appeared. He came out of the bedroom quietly, the way he moved everywhere, and stood beside his brother and looked at Dante with the expression Dante had categorized across all their interactions as genuine neutrality. Not the performed neutrality of an adult managing a situation, but the actual neutrality of a child who had not yet decided and was not going to decide prematurely. "Hi," Luca said. "Hi," Dante said. Luca looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Are you staying for lunch?" Vivian appeared from the kitchen at this, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at Luca and then at Dante with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and something more complicated. "That depends," she said to Luca, "on whether we have enough." "We have enough," Luca said, with the certainty of a child who has done the calculation. Dante looked at Vivian. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was not the dramatic event of a reconciliation, was not the thing that movies about people like them would have made of this moment. It was smaller and realer than that. It was 2 adults who had been through enough together and separately that they were past the performance of large moments. "Stay for lunch," she said. Lunch was soup, made from what was in the kitchen, which was the kind of soup that is better than any soup made from a recipe because it is made from what is present rather than what is planned. Marco ate with one hand and kept drawing something on a napkin with the other. Luca ate seriously, with the attention he brought to most things. Vivian ate and listened and spoke occasionally and watched, without appearing to watch, the specific quality of her sons in proximity to the man who was their father, reading the room the way she read everything, thoroughly, without showing the process. Dante ate and said things when there was something real to say, and did not fill the silences with performance. He had spent 20 years filling rooms with the performance of authority and calm. He was finding, in the dismantling of everything that had required that performance, that the space left behind it was not emptiness. It was something else. He did not have a name for it yet.
After lunch, Marco said, "Can you see my room?" Dante looked at Vivian. She made a gesture, small, with the dish towel, that meant yes, but don't make it a thing. He went with Marco to the bedroom. It was narrow, the two beds close together with a path between them, more drawings on the walls, a shelf with books, and the wooden toy Luca had been carrying in the bakery on the first morning. Marco showed him the drawings with the specificity of someone who knows exactly what each one is and when it was made. This one was from the summer, this one he did when he was sick and didn't have anything else to do. This one Luca said didn't look like a bridge, but it was definitely a bridge. Dante stood in his son's room and looked at the walls and felt something resolve in him, quietly and without announcement, the way large things sometimes resolve, not with the drama commensurate to their size, but in a small interior movement, a settling, a completion of something long incomplete. "Marco," he said. The boy looked at him. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you decide what you think about it." Marco's eyes were level. "Okay." "I was not dead," Dante said. "Your mother told you I died before you were born. That's not what happened." He kept his voice even and direct, the way a thing this large required. Not softened, not managed, just said, "I left. I made a choice to leave, and your mother was alone, and I wasn't there for any of the years you've been alive." He paused. "That's my fault. Not your mother's. She did the right thing by you, everything she did, and the reason she had to do it alone is because I made a wrong choice a long time ago." He looked at his son. "I'm not asking you to be okay with that right now. You don't have to be. But I'm not going to let you believe something that isn't true." Marco was very still. His face was doing what Marco's face did when it was processing something large, going flat and focused, all the available processing power directed inward. "Did you know about us?" he said, "when you left?" "No," Dante said. "I didn't know your mother was pregnant." He paused. "I found out 3 weeks ago when I saw you at the bakery." Marco absorbed this. "And now you're here. And now I'm here." Another silence. Dante waited. He had decided coming up the stairs that he was going to let whatever Marco did with this be what it was, not rushed, not managed, not shaped toward an outcome. "Is your name really Moretti?" Marco said. "Yes." "Then our name is wrong." The simplicity of this hit him directly. "I suppose it is," he said. "Your mother's name is Ashcroft. She kept it as your name. That was her choice to make, and it was the right choice at the time she made it." He paused. "What happens with names going forward is something we would all talk about together. You, your brother, your mother, and me." Marco looked at him for a long moment. He looked at him with those amber dark eyes that saw things directly and reported them to the interior without social mediation. "Okay," he said. Not forgiveness, not warmth, not yet. Just, okay. I have received this information. I am going to do something with it that I haven't decided yet. Okay. Dante recognized the word. He had heard it twice from his mother in the last 3 weeks. He understood now where Marco got it. He went back to the front room. Luca was sitting on the couch with his book. He looked up when Dante came in. "Did you tell him?" Luca said. Dante stopped. "You knew." "I figured it out," Luca said. "Not proud of it, not performing the revelation, just reporting." "The eyes," he said, "and you kept coming to the bakery, and then the way you looked at us that first morning." He looked down at his book and back up. "I didn't say anything to Marco because I didn't know if it was right." Dante sat down on the other end of the couch. "It's right," he said. Luca nodded. He opened his book and then closed it again on his thumb. "Are you going to live here?" he said. "No," Dante said. "Not right now. Maybe not for a long time." He paused. "That would be something your mother and I would have to agree on, and we're a long way from that." "But you'll come back." "Yes, Ed," he said. "Every time I say I will." Luca looked at him. Whatever the assessment produced, he kept it interior. He opened his book. Dante sat on the other end of the couch in the room full of drawings and let the quiet of a Saturday afternoon in a small apartment on Carver Street be what it was. He and Vivian talked on the fire escape after the boys were in their room. She had brought tea, which was not something he drank, but which he accepted because she had brought it. And they stood on the fire escape with the November air around them, and the side street below, and the city beyond that, going on in its continuous, ordinary way. "I told Marco," he said. "I know," she said. "He came out and told me what you said, word for word." A pause. "He has a good memory." "He's remarkable," Dante said. "They both are." She held the cup in both hands. "They made themselves, mostly. I did what I could, but—" She stopped. "A lot of who they are is just who they are." He looked out at the street. "I told Luca I'd come back every time I say I will. Don't make promises you're not certain of." "I'm certain of that one." She looked at him sidelong. The look of someone assessing whether the certainty is real or is the performance of certainty, which was a distinction she was more qualified than most to make. "The foundation," she said. "Sal told me about it." "The lawyers are setting it up," he said. "Legitimate, clean, auditable. The remaining assets that aren't subject to federal seizure, and there's enough that isn't, go into it. Family security services, legal representation for people who can't afford it, neighborhood infrastructure." He paused. "The Carver Street School. That was already in process. I want to finish it properly." "You're going to run a foundation," she said. The words were not skeptical. They were just new. She was trying them on. "Someone will run it," he said. "I'll be involved. It's going to take time to build into something real." He looked at the street. "I have time. For the first time in 20 years, I have actual time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does it feel like?" "Strange," he said. "Like standing in a room where all the furniture has been moved." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. The first thing like that he had heard from her. "I told the boys the truth about their name," he said, "about what the right name might be. I told them it was a conversation that involved all of us." She looked at him. "It is," he said. "I'm not deciding anything about their name or their lives unilaterally. I'm stating a fact and saying the decisions belong to all of us." She looked out at the street. She held the cup. "You know what I thought when I saw you in the bakery?" she said. "The first morning." "What?" "I thought, he's going to want something." She said it without accusation, just accurately. "That was my first thought. Not that he found us, not what this means. Just, what does he want from this? Because that's who you were. Everything was in service of something." "Yes," he said. "And then you stood there looking at them," she said. "And you looked—" She stopped. "You looked like a man who had been hit by something and didn't know it yet. And I thought, that's different." Dante said nothing. "It doesn't fix it," she said. 9 years doesn't get fixed by a look on a man's face in a bakery." "I know. But it was different." She picked up her cup. "I noticed it." They stood on the fire escape in the November air, and below them Carver Street went about its evening. The bakery on the corner closed for the night. The lights in the apartment buildings coming on one by one, a couple walking a dog, a kid on a bicycle not dressed warmly enough for the temperature. The ordinary life of a neighborhood that had been Moretti territory and was now simply a neighborhood, which was the smallest of the things that had changed in the last 3 weeks, and also, in some way that Dante was still working out, the most significant. "I need to say something," Dante said. She waited. "What my father did. Telling me to leave, knowing you were pregnant, making the calculation that children were a liability and acting on it before I could." He looked at his hands on the railing. "I'm not using that as an explanation. I made the choice. He presented an assessment and I accepted it and I walked out. That's mine." He paused. "But I need you to know that I have thought about it every day since Naples, and I understand now what it cost you and what it cost them and what it cost something that I didn't know existed until it was already 9 years gone." He stopped. "I'm sorry, Vivian. Not the version of sorry that's a transaction. Sorry, meaning I understand the damage, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, and I'm going to spend the rest of the time I have trying to be something different from what I was." The city was getting darker. The lights were coming on properly now, the street below going amber in the lamplight. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he did not try to fill it. I know, she said finally. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Maybe some of it never. He understood that, and it was appropriate. It was the right scale of response to the right scale of damage. But I know meant she had heard it, meant the words had landed where they were intended to land. That was enough for tonight. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. He took the boys to the park in Gravesend that he had mentioned to Marco, the one near the water, and stood with his hands in his pockets watching Marco run the perimeter of the park at a pace that suggested he was mapping it, and watching Luca sit on a bench with his book for 20 minutes before the book went away, and he started paying attention to a bird that had landed nearby with the focused, patient attention of a child who finds things genuinely interesting and doesn't feel the need to announce the interest. He was not their father yet in the way that the word contained everything it was supposed to contain. He was the man who came on Saturdays, who answered questions directly when they were asked, who showed up when he said he would. That was what he had, and he did not inflate it or rush it or try to compress 9 years of absence into a series of performed moments. He let it be what it was, and trusted that what it was could grow into something more if he kept showing up. Vivian watched all of it from the outer edge, and she let it happen. And occasionally there were evenings after the boys were in bed, where she and Dante sat in the front room of the Carver Street apartment and talked. Sometimes about the boys, sometimes about the foundation, sometimes about nothing in particular, the kind of conversation that doesn't have an agenda and that is therefore more honest than the kind that does. The federal case proceeded. There were months of it, documents, depositions, meetings with investigators that were grinding and detailed and sometimes humiliating in the way that the dismantling of a thing you built always is, when you are the one doing the dismantling. Dante did it with the same thoroughness he had brought to building it. The cooperation agreement held. 3 of the 9 captains entered their own agreements. Carmine fled to Florida and was arrested there in February by agents who had been waiting and who were thorough. The Moretti organization, as it had existed for 30 years, ceased to exist. Not cleanly, not instantly. These things never end cleanly. They disperse. They leave residue. They take time to fully lose their shape. But the center of it was gone, and without the center the rest was just money and habit, and men who had to find other arrangements, and those things, in time, find their own level. Sal retired. He moved to a house in New Jersey that he had been maintaining for exactly this purpose, apparently, with a garden that he intended to take seriously. He told Dante this at their last meeting, sitting in the Gravesend house that was in the process of being sold, and Dante looked at his uncle's face, the face of a man his father's generation, a man who had given his whole adult life to something that was now over, and understood that the end of the organization was not only a loss for the men who had been part of it, but also, in a way that coexisted with everything else, a release. "Come to New Jersey sometime," Sal said. "Bring the boys. There's a yard." "I will," Dante said. Sal stood up and put on his coat and stopped at the door and said, without turning around, "Your father called me, from Naples, after you left." A pause. He said, "He's different from me." He said it like he was surprised. Sal paused again. "I told him that was the idea." He left. The Gravesend house sold in March. The morning the sale closed, Dante drove there alone and walked through the empty rooms, which were the rooms of his childhood, and then the rooms of his adulthood, and now the rooms of nothing, waiting for the next person who would make them into something. He stood in the study where he had sat in the leather chair on the night he had held the whiskey he didn't drink, the night the floor had shifted under him, the night everything had started to become something other than what it had been. The room was empty. The floor was the same floor. He stood on it and did not feel it shift. He drove to Carver Street. Vivian opened the door before he knocked. She had been expecting him. She had known about the closing. They had talked about it. She looked at his face in the way she looked at his face, reading it the way she always had, better than anyone. She stepped back from the door. He went in. The front room was the same, the couch, the bookshelves, the walls covered in Marco's drawings, which had grown in the months since he'd first stood there, new drawings accumulating over and around the old ones, the walls becoming denser and more layered the way cities get denser and more layered when they are actually being lived in.
Marco was at the kitchen table with a proper sketchbook. Dante had bought it in October, one of the first things he had done. Not a grand gesture, just a sketchbook, brought on a Saturday without announcement, set on the table. Marco had looked at it for a moment and then opened it to the first page and started drawing without comment, which was the best possible reception. He was drawing now, bent over the sketchbook with the focused absorption that was his most natural state. He looked up when Dante came in. "The house sold," he said. Not a question. He had known about the house. Dante had told him, had told both boys, had made a point of telling them the things that were happening because they had the right to know, and because he had decided that the management of information was not something he was going to practice in this family in any direction ever again. "This morning," Dante said. Marco nodded. He looked back at the sketchbook and then back up. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Dante said. Marco assessed this, found it accurate, went back to drawing. Luca appeared from the bedroom. He had grown, or Dante had started noticing how much he'd grown, in the way you notice the growth of things you are paying attention to. He came into the front room and stood in it and looked at Dante with those quiet eyes. "You want to see something?" he said. "Sure," Dante said. Luca went to his room and came back with a book. Different from the cracked spine book from the first week, newer, a library book about architecture. He had marked several pages with folded paper corners. "This one," he said, opening to a page. It was a building, a photograph of a community center somewhere in Europe, clean lines, open spaces, the kind of building that looked like it had been designed to be useful rather than impressive. "For the foundation," Luca said, "for what you're building. I thought maybe something like this." Dante looked at the page. He looked at his son standing beside him with a library book and paper corners marking pages and an opinion about what a building should look like. "That's a good idea," he said. "I have more," Luca said. "Show me," Dante said. They sat on the couch, the two of them, with the library book between them, and Luca turning pages and explaining what he had found and why, with the careful, precise delivery of someone who has thought about something seriously and wants to be taken seriously in return. Dante listened. He asked questions when he had them. He looked at the pages and at his son's hands turning them and at the room around them, the drawings on the walls, the sketchbook open on the kitchen table, the sound of Vivian moving around in the kitchen making something ordinary domestic sound, the sound of a household in the late afternoon. After a while, Marco came in from the kitchen and sat on the arm of the couch and looked at the book over Luca's shoulder with the critical eye of someone who has opinions about buildings. "The windows are too small," Marco said. "They're not too small," Luca said. "They're proportional. They look small. That's not the same as being small. It's a problem if it looks small, even if it isn't small. That's a different problem than..." "Boys," Vivian said from the kitchen doorway. Not stern, almost amused. Both of them looked at her. The argument suspended, filed for later. Dante looked at the two of them, at his sons, on a couch in Carver Street on a March afternoon, arguing about windows in a library book about architecture, and felt, quietly and without announcement, the thing that had been building in him since a morning in October when he had walked into a bakery and heard a bell above a door and seen two boys look up. It was not a dramatic feeling. It did not arrive with the weight of its own significance. It was smaller than that, and it was more than that, the way the small things always are when they are real. It was the feeling of a man who has come to the right place after a very long time of being in the wrong ones, and who understands, standing in it, that the right place is not a location but a choice, and that the choice requires nothing more and nothing less than showing up and being present and telling the truth and doing it again tomorrow. Vivian caught his eye from the doorway. She looked at him for a moment, the look that read him, that had always read him, that he had spent 14 months trying to be unreadable to because being readable felt like vulnerability, and he had built his life on the premise that vulnerability was the one thing he could not afford. She looked at him, and she let him see that she saw him, and there was something in that, not a declaration, not a promise, not the thing that would take a long time still to build and that he was not going to rush, but something. A quality of the look that had not been there in the bakery doorway, or on the stoop of the Cobble Hill house, or on the fire escape in November.
something that was possibly the very beginning of a thing. He looked back at her. Marco resumed the argument about the windows. Luca maintained his position with the patient certainty of someone who knows he is right and is willing to wait. Vivian went back into the kitchen. Dante stayed where he was. Outside, Carver Street went about its evening. The bakery on the corner with the no-name sign and the patched awning and the bell above the door was closing up for the night. The last customers gone. Ferretti wiping down the counter and turning off the overhead light that had been flickering for years. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a school was getting a new roof, new windows, new equipment for a library that had needed it for a decade. And the children who went to that school did not know who was paying for it and did not need to know. They just went to school. A man had walked into that bakery 4 months ago and seen 2 boys with his eyes, and the floor had shifted under him, and he had followed the shift all the way to its end, which was not an end at all but a beginning. The beginning of the only thing that had ever been real, that he had spent 20 years building an empire to avoid having to face, that had been waiting for him on a Tuesday morning in a neighborhood he had taxed and protected and never truly known, in the face of a boy drawing cities on a paper bag. He had come home. Not the Gravesend house, not the Cobble Hill brownstone, not any of the places that had been his by deed or title or force. Here, this apartment, this couch, this argument about windows, this ordinary light at the end of an ordinary day on Carver Street. He had come home, and it had cost him everything, and it was worth it, and he knew that, felt it without needing to name it, the way you feel the things that are true, not as ideas, but as the ground beneath your feet. And he sat on the couch between his sons and listened to the argument and looked at the walls full of cities his son had drawn, and outside the window the city that contained all of them went on, indifferent and alive, the way cities do.